Nick, is that working okay?
Yeah, I'm seeing it.
Thank you.
Not a problem.
We gonna have fun?
I don't know. I hope you're not in the office because the weather's looking bad.
No, I don't think anybody's in the office tonight.
Yeah.
So I don't.
That's a good thing.
Yes.
We're having a little technical delay. We'll get started here in about a minute or two, okay?
Hi, everyone. I'm having a bit of a technical problem. I'm not Nick Zepp.
I just corrected that for you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Not a problem.
All right. Make sure everyone's here. Okay, looks like we have everybody. Okay, so I would like to, at this time, call to order the February 15th, 2021 regular board meeting of the State College Area School District Board of Directors. And I'd like to ask you all to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, I pledge allegiance to the flag of
The
the United States of
allegiance
America,
to the flag of the United States of
for
America,
which it stands,
and to the
one
republic,
nation,
one nation,
under God,
under God,
indivisible, with
indivisible,
liberty and
with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to announce the board held an executive session on February 1st regarding negotiations. And I'd like to welcome everyone who is here with us viewing remotely. Board members, with an agenda before you, do you have any requested changes to the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. For our audience this evening, public comment time is provided at the end of the meeting, as well as prior to any action items or votes by the board. At this time, Dr. O'Donnell is going to go over some of the housekeeping items related to our virtual format.
You bet. And I would like to have the board please welcome our student representative for the third marking period, Michaela Spake. Michaela, thanks for joining us, and we welcome you this evening. You're welcome. Tonight's meeting being a virtual meeting as a result of the pandemic, and we will resume normal in-person meetings when it's safe to do so. During the meeting, the IT help desk is available if the community encounters any technical difficulties. You may email itsupport@scasi.org or give us a call at 814-231-7743. Public comment may be made at the end of our agenda, as Mrs. Concepcion shared, as well as prior to the board taking action on an individual item. For community members who wish to make a comment, please use the raise hand feature in the Zoom program accessed under the participants tab. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. O'Donnell. At this time, I'll call on our board secretary for the roll call of board members.
Dr. Vader,
Here.
Ms. Bedell,
Here.
Ms. Brandt,
Here.
Ms. Concepcion,
Here.
Dr. Duffy,
Here.
Mr. Fazzard,
Here.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Here.
Mr. Leos,
Here.
Ms. Zidney.
Here. I'm having some technical problems too, sorry.
Okay, so your raised hand is for, okay. At this time, we have communications on our agenda, and I'd like to call on Dr. O'Donnell at this time for the superintendent's update and to introduce our student government representatives who are here this evening as well.
You bet. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share a few items, and then I'm going to ask Isabel Snyder, our student government president, to make introductions and then also get us going on the student government update this evening. In regard to the weather and our current academic calendar, I know next year's calendar is on the agenda. Currently, if we have another snow day and no school, that day would be made up on Friday, June 4th. And the reason I'm sharing these is because this week's an interesting week, to say the least, when you look at all the varied forecasts. So I want to make sure that we touch on this. Because we still have a way to go before spring, I'd like to speak to what we will do if we have additional winter weather challenges. And that is, if we use one more snow day, then we are going to plan to look at pivoting to fully remote learning days when we need to due to weather, rather than shift student days further into June. The rationale to this pertains to the question relating to the value of learning. And there's no question, as with most everything during the pandemic here, this can be argued with several opinions, and we simply have a decision that we have to make. We fundamentally believe that in-person learning experiences is better than fully remote status for most students up to a point. And we are looking at reaching that point. That is, if we extend our student year further into the summer, especially with the context of everything and the further rollout of vaccines included, we envision seeing a decline in the value of the in-person and remote learning continuing into mid-June for many of our students. So this week we'll clarify this information, what I just shared, in a communication to our employees and our families. We have interacted multiple times with the Department of Education that we are approved for this because of our continuity of education plan. And so I just wanted to share that update with the board. On tonight's agenda, we do have a board resolution regarding anticipated proposed charter and cyber charter school legislation. Every school board in Center, Clinton, and Clearfield counties is taking action on this resolution. So that's 11 different school boards. This is due to the common issues we're all facing in each of our public school districts. Our intent is to help our community understand the issues, as our community is paying the vast majority of the more than $6 million per year to both charter and cyber charter schools with no local public oversight by SCASD and our board. This matter is on our agenda this evening as our first action item, thus the board will have a conversation at that time. In regard to the vaccine and a COVID update, in relationship to the vaccines and our employees, I have some positive news as well as our community. On Saturday, February 6th, we did partner with Center Volunteers in Medicine to administer 1,200 first doses to community members, including about 250 of our employees who qualified as part of the first phase, or phase 1A. The second dose for those individuals will occur on February 27th at Mount Airy Middle School. To date, we've had approximately 300 of our employees receive at least the first dose of the vaccine. We're continuing to plan with CVIM, as well as our local healthcare providers, to be prepared to offer additional vaccination clinics for our community once they're able to obtain more doses of the vaccines. I'd like to thank the entire CVIM team, especially their clinical services director, Christy Mazzella, for their collaboration with our school district. In regard to our district status, with the rollout of the vaccine beginning to see some progress, we're being asked by more and more families as to when we'll have secondary students in school every day. At this time, the CDC and the Pennsylvania Department of Health are maintaining the 6 feet physical distancing requirement, and our health and safety team advisors support that. Because we don't have a timeline on when this might be reduced, we are planning to stick with our current 2-cohort model for the time being in our secondary schools. As we've said before, we don't have the capacity to offer daily in-person learning and still adhere to the distancing requirement. With that said, we are exploring ways of helping more 6th grade families that are struggling with supervision at home. Family circumstances and available space will be evaluated on a case-by-case basis by the principals. This is really due to the 6th grade schedule and the opportunity it presents, as well as the fact that these are our youngest secondary students, and they have different, less complex schedules than our older grades. Finally, before I turn it over to Isabel, on behalf of our district administration, I'd like to congratulate faculty member Kristen Albright, who was recently honored. Kristen was named the Teacher of the Year by the Pennsylvania Association of Educational Communications and Technology for her STEM instruction at Radio Park and Coral Street Elementary Schools. So we'd like to congratulate Kristen and keep up the great work. Now we have an update from our high school student government officers. I believe that we're joined by Isabel, Clarissa, Owen, Elena, Sage, and Chitere. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Isabel at this time. So welcome, Isabel and company.
So thank you, Dr. O'Donnell, and thank you all so much for having us. We're so excited to be with you today, and just wanted to share a little bit about what's been going on with us. We've had a busy couple of months and are excited for some more sort of big action steps in the next few months. So first off, I know we've connected with most of you, but just in case, we wanted to do another quick whip around of names, pronouns, grades, and our position on the board. So I can get started, and then folks, if we want to just go in order of our usual listing. So my name is Isabel Snyder. I use she, her pronouns. I am a senior at State High and the president of student government.
And hi, everyone. My name is Clarissa Tice. I'm the vice president of student government this year. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a junior at State High.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alana Lang. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a junior and the student secretary.
Hello, my name is Owen Adams. I use he, him pronouns. I am in 12th grade and I'm the student government treasurer.
Hello, I'm Sage Castro. I am a senior. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm the parliamentarian.
Hi, I'm Chitere Ikuda. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a senior and I'm the student speaker of Leadership Council.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. So just tonight, we wanted to really quickly run you through our newest addition to our Leadership Council Constitution and our Student Government Constitution. We have a really great statement that we've created as a precursor to some action we have going on in these next few months, just claiming our intention for anti-racist and continuing our inclusivity work on all levels of our organization. So we'll be sharing that with you tonight. And then each of us has just a little rundown on some events that both have happened and then some next steps, some things looking forward. And then we would love to answer any questions you might have, and then we'll head out and leave you to it. Awesome. So for starters, we will just read through our statement. And this statement, I know we don't have the chat enabled, but it is available on our website. Just if you go to the student government page on the State High home site as a whole, it should pop up. And if you would like to see a copy of it more like up close, let us know and we can share that with you as well. Awesome. So I'll get started. We recognize that we cannot claim to adequately represent voices of all students, specifically students who often have been left out, when our organization does not include, celebrate, and advocate for them. This is important work. We intend our work to be a model for other governing structures.
This is not the end, but the beginning of a multifaceted overhaul of our practices. It is a promise to do better, to be mindful and proactive in our school government, of including students and groups that have been marginalized. Therefore, we, the members of the State College Area High School student government, serving in both elected and voluntary positions within the student body, recognize that we, through our involvement in this organization, have a responsibility to all students.
Whereas, we recognize that the American public school system has not consistently and adequately represented the rich diversity of our nation. Whereas, we recognize our responsibility in the creation of a truly equitable, safe, and just school for all students, faculty, staff, and community members.
Whereas we recognize that our role is to thoughtfully consider the vast amount of diverse ideas and challenge those who obstruct all students' ability to a high-quality education, and to educate and advocate for policies that raise up individuals and groups that have often been left out.
Resolved, we dedicate ourselves to the work of equality, equity, and inclusion. We will celebrate and work with all people while challenging ideas, policies, and procedures that obstruct all students' right to a high-quality education. Resolved, we will increase opportunities for student involvement with real change, empowering all students and providing them with the tools to create the school community they deserve.
Resolved, we will revise the student government officer application process, allowing for greater accessibility and opportunity to all students. Resolved, we will seek out and encourage more diverse and underrepresented students to contend for leadership positions and encourage more participation in Leadership Council.
Awesome. Thank you all. And we'll read that one more time as we close out today, just as a good reminder to all of us of what we should keep central as we're embarking on all of our policy and procedural decisions. So I'll now hand it over to Sage to talk a little bit about some constitutional changes we have coming up.
Yeah, so like Isabel mentioned, as we were looking through the Constitution this year, we realized that we need to make some revisions just to make it clear of our overall equity and inclusion in student government and specific and including LC and any lens or field that has to do with that. So some of the revisions we plan to include that statement we just read, leadership opportunities, how we can create more and get students more involved in those leadership opportunities. The role of LC and those in LC, what their role is, making that more clear, and as well as the student government election process.
Awesome. Thanks, Sage. And I think you said this, but just in case, LC is our leadership council, our student legislative body that's open to anybody within the school to join at any point. Awesome. And now I'll hand it over to Alana to talk about a really great project we have coming up in these next few weeks.
Yes. So one of our updates includes our Safety Week, which is a campaign of weekly reminders as a byproduct of many requests that we have to remind our state high body through emails, morning announcements, and then interactive things with our student body. So hopefully safely and creatively seeing who can be the most creative in mask wearing, or things from maintaining social distancing, washing hands, and staying home if you feel sick. So we're looking forward to that. We've already rolled out our first week, which was an email to all the students. And our next week, this upcoming week, will be an announcement, maybe including our Leadership Council speaker, Cheetah Ray. I'm calling her out. But we're looking forward to that and just trying to keep it fun and remind our students and our peers and our teachers to remain wearing their masks the proper way, covering from above your nose to your chin, and all that good stuff. Back to you, Isabel.
Awesome. Thanks, Alana. And Alana has been a big visionary in making that happen. So a big shout out to her for outlining a great way for that to be structured over the next few weeks. Awesome. And now I'll hand it over to Owen to talk about another event we have coming up.
Yeah, so in recognizing the importance of mental health always, and especially this year with all the challenges that students are facing, we've kind of been talking about having different multiple events with mental health, and we actually haven't been the only group that's been thinking this, and have joined forces with peer advocates and My Mental Health Matters. And we're looking at sometime in mid-March, so in the upcoming month, looking at having a multi-day, possibly a week-long mental health event where we will bring in guest speakers, have discussions, and provide resources, all with the hope of just adding and supporting everybody's mental health in these challenging times. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Owen. And now, Clarissa, over to you.
Awesome. Yeah. So I'm going to talk about two things. The first being a project student government was able to start this year in order to improve our relationship and communications with the middle schools in our district. And it's a program we're calling the Catalog. So we currently have 25 eighth graders who are involved in the program. And essentially what we've done is we've taken around 30 to 40 high school students who are really academically and extracurricularly motivated. And we've assigned them to one of 5 focus groups, which are STEM, leadership and advocacy, visual and performance arts, and then career development, and I'm blanking on the last one, athletics, which was surprisingly our least popular one. So we've assigned mentors, high school mentors, to each of these groups, and then our 8th graders are able to go through and pick 3 of the 5 of these groups to sign up for, and then they get to have one monthly meeting in these groups where they're hearing about different academics and extracurriculars relating to these focus groups that they're going to be able to get involved with at the high school. And what's so special about the catalog is since we're able to make it smaller groups, so it's like maybe 4 middle school students and then like 5 high school students, they're really able to get one-on-one personalized advice, as well as just get those high school anxieties and questions sort of answered, which has been kind of a struggle with COVID this year. And then the other thing I'm going to talk about is a really exciting initiative that just happened last week with the instatement of a SCASD representative on the Borough Council, which was a seat created separately from student government, but in coming years, the application and appointment process is going to be occurring through student government. And the role of this representative is not only to serve as a communication vessel between high school students and the Borough Council, but also just really to promote civic education and hopefully let the kids at SCASD know about all the awesome opportunities to get involved in our local government, what local government elections look like, getting registered to vote, sort of all those things that we've noticed some gaps in recent years, and hopefully do that in a holistic, fun, and new way. So those are the 2 items I have to update on.
Awesome. Thanks, Clarissa. We're so excited about those and those 2 very new projects for student government. So we're really excited about what those are looking like this year. And now, Cheetah, right over to you.
So, keeping with the process of changing our constitution, although COVID has had its negative impact, one great impact.
Uh-oh, Cheetah, right? I think our connection cut out for you. Sorry, can you hear us okay?
It looks like she's on mute.
Oh, no.
Actually, maybe it looks like her video is frozen too.
No worries.
Did I cut out?
You're good. You're back now.
I'm so sorry. So in regards to elections, one positive impact of COVID has been how our electoral process has happened, because due to COVID, we had to hold the elections for government positions, Senate positions, and student speaker in the beginning of this school year. And rather than having the 100 signatures that we require for all government and Senate positions to gauge from students, due to COVID restrictions, that really wasn't feasible. So we altered it to having a process where we have students fill out what their platform is and even show a video of what they wanted to view for students, and students voted based upon those processes. And we hope to alter that to better fit for students who may be introverted, but still great student representatives. Also, in regards to the student speaker position, we hope to change it from the beginning of the school year, which we usually do it in the past, to the end of the school year prior. So whoever's voted into that student speaker position will be the beginning of the school year with the government officials as well. Also, we are hoping to redefine and clarify the role of board representatives and the process for applying for that as well. So we're hoping to have a process, a teacher-led recommendation to just show what their involvement throughout the school is like, and have a panel filled with board representatives and even student representatives from student government. And we hope to talk to Dr. O'Donnell further about clarifying that role. And in regards to Leadership Council and Student Gov and Senate, we actually have joined forces to create a newsletter, because we've realized throughout the years our information and what we get out to students have been kind of blurred, because students will talk about an issue or voice an issue. However, we may be working on it, that we're just not actively telling the student body. And we realize this information should be privated, and it's what we deserve to give the students. So we're trying to make a clarified newsletter through Google site where it have information on updates about what leadership councils we have and what different Senate offices are working on as well. So students have that one centralized hub of information. And back to you, Isabel.
Awesome. Thanks, Cheetah Ray. And then I'll just wrap us up with a couple things that we are looking at in the months to come, things that are just kind of getting started, but we're excited now that we're kind of in a big chunk in this spring section where we sort of have a final push through the end of the year. Just some things we're turning our attention to. So one of those is our swimsuit policy at the school district. Currently, we have a pretty significant gap in how it's enforced for our female presenting students versus our male presenting students. And we've had quite a few complaints over the years, and there have been multiple attempts to change it, I would say, over the last 5 to 10 years. But no real groundwork has ever kind of come into play. So we're excited to get the ball rolling on some changes there in the next few weeks. We're also looking at our leadership council and just making sure that though we typically recruit at the beginning of the year, we recognize that just recruiting via email right in the fall is a really sort of intense way and is definitely going to miss some students throughout the course of the year. Students who maybe feel like in September, in October, they are not totally ready to jump into a new club, but leadership or advocacy is something that they are really interested in. So right now we're in the process of working with all of our club and extracurricular facilitators and teachers who are running all those clubs throughout our school, and have kind of a calendar broken out. So over the next couple of weeks, we will be heading to all of those clubs and giving them some information about Leadership Council and how they can join and any questions they might have. So we're really excited about that over the next couple of weeks. We also are turning our attention back to a really important conversation we had started about sexual assault and harassment over the last few years. We're getting that kind of kicked off again with an open forum for students to come and share their experiences and share what they would like to see done, and if there are ways that we can be helpful to them, just kind of reopening that conversation. And there was that really great policy 103, I believe, passed last year. So making sure that that is publicized to students, that students know if they experience something like this, whether it be online or in person, that there are next steps for them, and making sure that we on a policy and procedural side are really enforcing those next steps and making students who are survivors of this kind of assault and harassment feel safe and feel heard. We are just continuing our work with, sorry, I'm looking down at my list, continuing our work with diversity and accessibility work, both within Leadership Council and just how our elections are running, how everything is sort of running, how we're communicating to students, making sure that students really know how to interact with us if they have complaints or if they have things we can be helpful with, making sure that we are all reachable, making sure that we're putting a training together for all future student government and student senate officers, when we're calling leadership literacy. And this is another beautiful brainchild, I believe, of Cheetah Ray's and a whole bunch of our amazing Gov members. Just a training that we can all kind of go through to make sure that we really understand the intricacies of student leadership as a whole, but also within SCASD specifically. And then, of course, just a little throwback, we had some really great teacher appreciation initiatives that happened at the beginning of the year, right as we were kicking off all of this COVID wackiness. We got some really fun cards with the help of our student body out to all of our teachers. Awesome. So sorry, I know that was a little fast and furious. So all that being said, let's read our statement one more time. GovBoard, if that sounds all right, and then we would love to answer any questions you might have, and then we're all good. Awesome, so I'll get us started. We recognize that we cannot claim to adequately represent the voices of all students, specifically students who have often been left out, when our organization does not include, celebrate, and advocate for them. This is important work. We intend our work to be a model for other governing structures.
This is not the end, but the beginning of a multifaceted overhaul of our practices. It is a promise to do better, to be mindful and proactive in our school governance of including students and groups that have been marginalized. Therefore, we, the members of the State College Area High School student government, serving in both elected and voluntary positions within the student body, recognize that we, through our involvement in this organization, have a responsibility to all students.
Whereas we recognize that the American public school system has not consistent and adequately represented the rich diversity of our nation. Whereas we recognize our responsibility in the creation of a truly equitable, safe, and just school for all students, faculty, staff, and community members.
Whereas we recognize that our role is to thoughtfully consider the vast amount of diverse ideas and challenge those who obstruct all students' ability to a high-quality education, and to educate and advocate for policies that raise up individuals and groups that have often been left out.
Resolved, we dedicate ourselves to the work of equality, equity, and inclusion. We will celebrate and work with all people while challenging ideas, policies, and procedures that obstruct all students' right to a high-quality education. Resolved, we will increase opportunities for student involvement with real change, empowering all students and providing them with the tools to create the school community they deserve.
Resolved, we will revise the student government officer application process, allowing for greater accessibility and opportunity to all students. Resolved, we will seek out and encourage more diverse and underrepresented students to contend for leadership positions and encourage more participation in the Leadership Council.
Awesome. Thank you all. And thank you to my fellow officers for all of your work kind of putting together and summarizing what we've been up to this year. So we just want to give you a chance if there's any questions or anything we can be helpful with, let us know.
Thanks, Isabel. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, Dr. O'Donnell, do you have any more parts of the superintendent update, or should we move on?
No, I do not have anything further.
Sounds good. Then we'll move on to the legislative update. Well, actually, let me see if board members have any questions for our student government representatives first. If any board members have questions or comments. Jim?
Just a comment. I think that the catalog idea is excellent. That'll really get kids involved early on in their, the high school career. I just think that's a superb idea. So congratulations to you guys that came up with it.
Laura?
Yeah, echoing that, and also the idea of continuing to look and encourage kids to get involved throughout the school year, because I think you're right that, that lots of kids aren't ready in September or right then, and yet by the time they wait till next September, you may lose them. So I think that's great. And thank you for coming to speak with us.
Lori?
Yeah, thank you all so much. First of all, I'm so impressed with your statement. I'm so glad that you bookended your remarks with that statement, because it, as a person who teaches a lot of public speaking, the fact that you set us up for that presentation with that statement, and then you expressed all of the different ways that you're working on making that statement real in the lives of the schools was tremendous. And then to remind us of that, I'm excited to help you and to work on any of the projects that you feel that we can be helpful with. And then my last point is, how many of you are graduating?
I think
so we still have Alana and Clarissa. Okay. Well, I'm thrilled that you're going through a training process that will help to pass the baton. And for those of you graduating, it's going to be such a wonderful journey for you, the next chapter. But I'm so thrilled that we've got a few of you still lingering behind to continue the good work. So thank you for being here tonight.
Gretchen?
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you all for taking the time to come and speak with us tonight. And what you said in your statement is really, there's so many inclusive ideas in so many ways that really helps to execute the inclusive excellence policy that the board passed. And a policy is just a policy, but what you're talking about is actually implementing that policy. And I'm so impressed with your ideas, with your statement. I appreciate that you read it at the beginning and then at the end. That's really helpful, not only for us, but anybody else who is listening or will listen after this meeting, because a lot of people just listen afterwards. And I also just wanted to mention that you have no idea how many lives you're potentially affecting in a positive way by bringing attention to these issues, and that's something that hopefully, when you go to sleep tonight, you're going to know that in the long term, this could really have some positive effects on other students. So thank you so much.
Michaela?
I just wanted to say I'm really proud of you guys, and you did a great job. And I really enjoyed hearing that you guys want to also encourage other students to vote and go out and actually participate in society and not think about things. But I'm really proud of you guys. You guys did awesome.
Dan?
Yeah, I just want to echo the words of encouragement and support from other members of the board. I want to thank the Leadership Council for coming forward and giving us this overview, particularly the larger goals under which you're working. The area that, because of my career and my work previously in the schools, that means the most to me is the area of mental health. And this is a real crucial time. Everyone's under a great deal of stress, and particularly the young people who don't have sometimes the opportunities to find a way through stressors like this. So it's really important to do the networking that you talked about by working with the My Mental Health Matters group. And I'm trying to think, what was the other group you mentioned besides My Mental Health Matters?
It was Peer Advocates.
The peer advocates. I think that kind of networking is really important. As I've thought about the risks, frankly, the risks for suicide that can occur, we have a few systems in place, but a really critical way of thinking of this is in terms of people advocating for each other and keeping an ear turned to those who are under stress and might be at risk for that kind of behavior. So it's really important for these networks to be formed and for these systems to be reinforced as much as possible. I appreciate everyone's work in this particular area. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. O'Donnell?
I know Isabel alluded to it, but during my meeting with Mr. Merritt, we reflected on some of the inconsistencies over the years that have evolved since Isabel's predecessor about 7 years ago helped us develop this policy and the guidelines that are attached with it. So if they're able to help us out with an administrative regulation this spring, as well as it does some of the guidance is in the policy, so we may request a tweak there. So that was one thing I asked Mr. Merritt if you guys could fit on your plate before the end of the school year of reflecting on that. I think that would be greatly appreciated while we have the capacity of this leadership team. And not that we can't evolve it into the future, but I think we have a pretty good experience to date over the past 6 years with this to make an update. So that's all I have. Thanks, Isabel and everybody.
Thank you all. It sounds like.
Thank you all for having us.
Yeah. Thank you.
Have a good night.
You too. Okay. So at this time we have our legislative update. Lori and David.
I don't have anything new for this week.
Yeah, I had a couple things quickly. From the angle of PSBA, they're making a concerted effort on a statewide basis to focus on prioritizing vaccinations for education professionals. So we're working with a number of state organizations, including PASA. There are 24 states that have, what's the word I'm looking for here, that have made this a priority. Pennsylvania is not one of them, so we're hoping to make some leeway and some effort in that direction. The other thing I want to mention, I think it's very much worth mentioning, is that in the governor's budget, for the first time in the history of Pennsylvania, is a serious effort that's being made to create an equitable funding source for the schools across this Commonwealth. And I don't know how optimistic I should feel about this, but the fact that it's on the table, I think is really encouraging. And that's what I have. Thanks.
Bob?
I just had it's a legislative matter. David joined Vern and me. We met with Senator Casey's legislative staff on Friday regarding the assessment waiver conversation, as he's not in support of a waiver for this year. And we explained in our situation why, from our lens, we don't believe we need to have our students participate in standardized assessments this year. And we sent a couple reports in relationship to what we utilize with the measures of academic progress. And it was a positive discussion, I think, to get them to understand that, especially for our students who are struggling or more at risk, that giving up all of that time for a standardized test where we already know the answer to the question, especially for those students, is not a good use of resources nor nor time during what we're experiencing. We'd rather have the day for those days for student learning, especially for the grade levels where students have more testing occurring. So we'll see how that goes with the federal government. And if we did get an update from the Department of Ed, and you probably likely saw that they shifted the window even later into the school year. So it looks like they're positioning themselves to try to buy more time to see if the federal government will go ahead and grant waivers. So I just wanted to share that update. Thanks to Vern for all the prep work and David for joining us on that call.
Good, thank you. Any other legislative items from any board members? Then Gretchen, is there a COG report for this evening?
There is not. The general forum has not met since our last meeting.
Okay, great. Okay, any other communication items from the board? Okay, then moving on to routine approvals. If we could have a motion to approve the routine approval listing as presented on the agenda.
So moved, Brandt.
Leah's second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion on routine approvals? Okay. Is there any public comment on the routine approvals? Okay, then we will go to a roll call vote.
Ms. Zidney,
Yes.
Dr. Bader,
Yes.
Ms. Bedell,
Yes.
Ms. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion,
Yes.
Dr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Fazard,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Yes.
Mr. Leos.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That has passed. Then moving on to action items. Item A is a motion to approve the charter school resolution shown in attachment 5A.
So moved, Brandt.
Adele, second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion on this item?
We had discussed and refined this over the past month, and obviously we built it off of what you had passed as a board in June, and the documents outlined with defining the challenges we're faced with, and then obviously outlines multiple bullet points there so everybody can see that. I made some comments on the front end, so how about if I step back and let board members weigh in on this? Thank you.
Sure. Laurel?
Thanks. I just wanted to mention that we had a meeting of our finance CAC, and the question came up about the statement at the very beginning about charter schools being independent agencies. And so I wanted to clarify that that is actually the way the state defines them. They are and I always forget what it stands for, LEA, Learning
Agency. A local education agency.
Thank you. Just like a school district is. So that's why we consider them independent.
They also have independent boards of trustees. We don't have any control. We have some limited impact on them, but they have a fully independent board of trustees that we neither pick nor control.
Right. And so because that had been brought up by a community member, I wanted to make sure that it was clear to everyone. It wasn't just our saying that, it really stems in the state law. So.
Amy?
Thanks. I just wanted to express my thanks for all the work that Dr. O'Donnell and other staff put into this, just for the public's knowledge and understanding. This was a real collaboration between multiple districts in our county. But I know that Dr. O'Donnell took a real leadership role and along with Dr. Griffin to pull together a lot of these other school districts in terms of sharing this widespread concern about problems with the funding formula and the state laws regarding charter management and oversight along with funding. So it's really important that we express the problems that we face as a result of that poor governance from the state, and specifically that's present in this document. And for community members who have questions or things that they're not certain about or understand, I know that many of us board members would be happy to share more information to clarify any questions or concerns. Thanks.
Gretchen?
Thanks, Amber. I just wanted to sort of reach out to all of the people who have made public comments in the past 5 years since I've been on the board, asking us why we never do anything about charter schools, and say, now we're doing something. So this resolution is in direct response to all of the problems that many people are already aware of, and hopefully this resolution will make even more people aware of. And legislatively, there's not been much that school boards could do, but this resolution hopefully will contribute to something happening legislatively at the state level in Pennsylvania. So to all those people who have written to the board or made public comments to the board about the problems with charter funding, now this is the way, process-wise, that the school board can actually do something. And I'm very grateful to Dr. O'Donnell and everyone who has put in time and energy into this resolution. Thank you.
Dan?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention the fact that I really appreciate the effort that went into not just revising, but refining the language in this resolution. It does reflect a lot of thought and care on the part of the team to make it as meaningful as possible and as accurate, as focused as possible. It's also important to mention that I had a couple of conversations with other IU board members who represent other school districts who are represented in this resolution, and how much they appreciated hearing about this opportunity that will be presented to them to act on the same resolution. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. I think it's worth, noting that one of the really major concerns that we have brought to light or focused on in this resolution is concerns about oversight. And our district was able to bring forward concerns about a charter school that had existed in our community a couple years ago. And I think, we laid out the concerns that we had in regard to their, how they were carrying out special education services in that charter school. That was all done on public agendas in these meetings. And I think it's important, as reflecting on that experience and what we saw there, and, the impact of the lack of local elected oversight over charter schools is reflected in this document, and how that can really impact students and their opportunities for the future when their learning suffers, potentially as a result of a lack of elected oversight over these relatively independent schools. So I'm glad that that's part of this document, and really grateful to see that so many school districts are speaking in one voice on so many issues related to this. Gretchen?
Sorry, I think I forgot to lower my hand. Sorry about that.
Oh, okay. All right. Any other discussion? Okay. Is there any public comment on this item? Okay. Then we will go to a roll call vote.
Dr. Bader,
Yes.
Ms. Bedell,
Yes.
Ms. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion,
Yes.
Dr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Fazard,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Yes.
Mr. Leos,
Yes.
Ms. Sydney.
Yes.
Okay. So that item is passed. Moving on to item B, that will be a motion to approve the contract with Edupoint Synergy for the new student information system as shown in attachment 5B.
So moved, Brandt.
Leah's second.
Duffy second.
That's been moved and seconded. Questions or discussion on this item? Laurel?
Thanks. I'm wondering, and I get confused sometimes with the different terms that we use. This is a student information system, but we also have had we have Illuminate that we just approved recently that I think is the learning information system. And we have things like Zoom that do video conferencing. And what I'm trying just would like some clarification on is that in the contract for this, it looked like this organization has some of those services that we did not include in our bid. And I'm wondering why. The particular reason I'm wondering is that we had heard from some of our teachers, especially, about challenges they faced when they had to enter data in multiple locations. So they'd put something here and here and here. They got communications from multiple things. So I think I've been trying to pay attention to how many different systems or platforms we ask people to handle. And that's why I'm asking the question.
Sure. I can jump on that one, Laurel. So you're right that Synergy is a student information system. And we do have a lot of other platforms like Illuminate or Zoom or IEP Writer, a wide variety. A lot of those have come about with eSchool. We don't necessarily have the functionality that we're seeing in the new Synergy. So that would be part of the answer to the question why we didn't purchase all of those platforms with Synergy is primarily we already have a lot of existing platforms in place that we'll be able to integrate with that platform. But we also don't want to jump the gun and purchase everything and do a full replacement until we understand the actual needs of all of the stakeholders and groups that are going to interact with those different applications outside of the student information system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is just hoping that there's real focus on that integration piece. And I did notice that this had a Canvas, what they call it, an integration, which I assume means at least that piece of it will tie in a little better. So let me just make sure I heard you correctly. The one issue was not wanting to jump all in until we had some experience. And the other is that we already have some systems that are working or in place. And so we might, am I right that we might then move in the future? We might not, depending how things go, but that you have an eye on trying to minimize the number of different places things have to be done.
Yeah, we're very hopeful to minimize the places. So there's two ways to do that. Obviously, we can do that through the integrations and keep the systems we have, or we can look long-term at potentially working with one of the additional modules inside Synergy that you've mentioned. But yeah, so integration is definitely something that we're looking at heavily. Canvas is just one specifically stated, but we're looking at IEP Writer, we're looking at Versatrans, we're looking at pretty much all of the current systems and tying them in. It is also just a timing thing, trying to do all of those at once. So we're going to work through them as we can from a top down.
Thank you very much for clarifying it.
Yep.
Yeah, and Laurel, I would also add, because Justin and I had some conversations. You mentioned Illuminate, and Illuminate is an assessment system that we have right now. But if we go to renew Illuminate, we're going to take a real hard look at Synergy system, because we feel there are systems within Synergy that can allow us to replace Illuminate moving forward. But we just want to start with the implementation of the student information system, and then we'll evaluate all those other components as we move forward.
Yeah, I think I had mislabeled it in my email to you, because it was particularly when I saw that they had an assessment thing, and I knew that we just recently passed one or approved one, that I began to think, wait a minute, why have we done that? So thanks for mentioning that one particularly.
Sure.
Any other questions? Okay. Is there any public comment? Okay, then we'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Bedell,
Yes.
Ms. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion,
Yes.
Dr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Fazard,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Yes.
Mr. Leos,
Yes.
Ms. Sidney,
Yes.
Dr. Bader.
Yes.
All right, that item is passed. Item C is a motion to approve the 2020-2021 assessment plan, and this is shown in attachment 5C.
So moved, Brandt.
I'll second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Then any questions or discussion? Okay, Laurel?
I feel I'm not very articulate in saying this, and I will vote to approve it, but I want to mention again the concern I have about assessment and the number of assessments we do, even though they may be very good, is that we should really be working to make sure that our students as well as our parents understand the role of assessment, and that we don't just see students as numbers on a page. So even though we do these assessments, there's also still a very strong role for the classroom teacher, the individual teacher, and the other professionals who work with students. Even if a test says they're doing well and a teacher knows that they are having challenges, that's important. And by the same token, when a child who's really seems, teacher's very confident that they're very on top of things, but they test poorly, they have trouble with the computer interface or something, that we don't just see our students as the sum of the various scores that they have as we do more and more.
Laura, let me interrupt you there, because I think I'd like you to be careful how you pick your words, because we see students as a kid first. So let me
That's what I was saying.
correct. You're saying, so we don't just, please be careful, because you're making comments
Okay, I see
that
what
are
you're
almost
saying, yeah.
accusations. And that's
No,
the
I didn't mean it that way.
to what we're about in our
Yeah, I
district.
didn't mean it that way. I think that some people have that impression, and that is not the case. But you're right that the way I worded it, people might be thinking, oh no, yeah, I think we do see people as kids first. And it's unfortunate that in some places that may be less of the case. So that's when I just see a large list of assessments that we can look at and see they're spread over 12 years and they're spread throughout the year, and they're not. But to someone just looking at this list, it could look very overwhelming. So
I think, look, the spreadsheet that's attached here, I think it's helpful that you're able to see by grade level. And I think my experience has been that teachers certainly in elementary school, where you're seeing a lot of, there's more concentrated amount of assessment there, teachers tend to be very communicative with parents about each of these assessments and what they're looking for. So I think we've been able to see that parent-teacher communication is critical there.
And I think that when we look at the tests that we administer to most students, the MAP, it is significantly more respectful than what we're required to do with the state assessment. Some of these assessments here are only used as part of requirements, which are very important to get students access to special services, gifted services, early literacy. There's nothing on here that's not evidence-based. The amount of time we've spent, me personally, trying to get our state to take a step back on standardized tests and give kids a more respectful experience, I think is what we want to do. We're giving information to teachers as part of the entire picture of a kid while the kids are with them. We do not harp on what we give them the next year for kids that they took 6 months ago. So, trying to give teachers valid information, but, give them information and put students into an experience that's respectful is what we're trying to accomplish. We have 7,000 students here, and they come from a variety of backgrounds. So this is, for the average person who doesn't understand assessment, this is a complex document. And if anybody is uncertain of it, we have the different meetings on tape. You can go look at the committee meeting, and you can listen to, some of these are probes that take a few seconds and are not very long at all. So, I suggest if anybody wants to understand more, they can go back, look at the committee meeting, or they can give our curriculum directors a call and have a sense of what we're doing and why. And we scrutinize anything that we look at implementing as a district, and we have to have purpose to it, and it needs to be respectful of the youngsters that are engaging in it. So I just need to add that with the way this started out.
Lori?
I just want to reflect back to our last meeting when Deirdre Bauer talked about the way that she looks at these assessments and how they help her to be, a curriculum director, a principal, and to be able to really understand the fullness of a child. And that when she talked about that, I thought that was the best way to characterize what we're doing here with these assessments.
And if I could add to that conversation point, really, it enables our classroom teachers to make those critical decisions on a daily basis, especially with some of those early literacy assessments that are very quick probes, but give the teacher immediate feedback. And, as building principals, we're constantly reflecting on within conversations with classroom teachers, is this reflective of the student's ability? And we really lean on the teacher's input into that process.
Scott?
Yeah, thanks. I didn't know whether it would be useful in any way, and certainly not trying to make a complicated document more complicated, but I didn't know whether there would be a way to identify which of the different assessments might be considered, and I'm using a word that's already in there, but instructional based, or something that helps guide our teaching versus something that is required, regulatory. I don't know what the right terminology would be when you try to parse out all the different options that are there. But I just didn't know whether that would be something that would be useful, because as people have said, this is somebody looking at this who's not in this on a daily basis, looks at this list, and it's rather daunting. And it might, I don't know whether it'd be useful for people to know more of what which of these assessments are ones that we voluntarily use, or that we use as a way to help us improve our instruction, not just check off a box. I don't know whether that makes sense.
Hey, Scott, Deirdre, I can respond a little bit to that. So there's one assessment that's completely regulatory, and that's the PSSA. We have to take that assessment. We're told the grades, we're told the time frame. Then there's a second layer of assessments that are kind of regulatory, and we get to choose which ones they are to determine who has access to Title I services, for example. We have to have norm reference standardized tests like Acadians and MAP to help us determine who might have access to those services. So we can choose the assessment, but they're semi-regulatory in that we have to have something. So we can choose which one it is. So there's like two layers to your question. And then there's the third one, which is running records, which is completely instructional, that really guides individual teachers with their work with students. So, I mean, I certainly could add something like that to the top of it if that kind of 3 layers of demarcation would be helpful.
So only if you all think that it would be helpful to a reader of this document to help them better understand. I'm not looking for it. I'm just raising a question whether that would help with some clarification maybe for our intended audience.
Yeah, I think we should have some discussion around it. When you look at, like, it does explain the time, and it's really a 5-page document. When you look at a grade level like kindergarten, has 3 different tools being used. That's it, the whole year of the kid's experience, beyond the most important assessments that are happening that year. That's the assessments, the curriculum-based assessments, teachers walking up and down the classroom, working with kids in the small groups as you see in the younger grades. Obviously, that's the most powerful tool for guiding teaching. So all in all, I don't think we have a large number of assessments in play here. If you really look at our document, we don't do a ton of benchmark standards-based assessments that many districts use that are 4+ times a year. I think we can look at that with our curriculum team, Scott, and see if there's a better way. We don't expect parents to look at this and be assessment experts. We'll help them along if what their child is showing the teacher causes a need to make a recommended change to the family, whether it's acceleration or whether it's for additional support. So, but I think I would defer to the teams and the teachers that serve on our curriculum teams that are part of these discussions.
All right. Any other questions or discussion? Okay. Is there any public comment on this item? Okay, then we'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion,
Yes.
Dr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Fazzard,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Yes.
Mr. Leos,
Yes.
Ms. Sidney,
Yes.
Dr. Bader,
Yes.
Ms. Bedell.
Yes.
So that item has passed, and item D is a motion to approve the special education tuition agreement with New Story, and this is shown in attachment 5D.
So moved, Brant.
Leah, second.
That's been moved and seconded. Is there any questions or discussion? I just have one, it's not really a question, but just to mention that this is the new school that opened up in what had been the Lamont building. And it looks like a great use of that space. So I'm glad to see, that our district will also be able to benefit from the location of that program there. Okay. Is there any public comment on this item? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote then.
Ms. Concepcion,
Yes.
Dr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Fazard,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Yes.
Mr. Leos,
Yes.
Ms. Sidney,
Yes.
Dr. Bader,
Yes.
Ms. Bedell,
Yes.
Ms. Brandt.
Yes.
That item has passed. Item E is a motion to approve the agreement with Dr. Diljo Singh for psychological services, and this is shown in attachment 5E.
So moved, Brant.
Second, Leah.
Duffy, second.
That's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on this item? Okay, is there any public comment? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote then.
Dr. Duffy,
Is my name called?
yes.
I'm having real trouble with reception.
Okay.
I'm yes on that.
Okay. Mr. Fazard,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Yes.
Mr. Leos,
Yes.
Ms. Sidney,
Yes.
Dr. Bader,
Yes.
Ms. Bedell,
Yes.
Ms. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion.
Yes. So that item has passed. Item F is a motion to authorize the administration to work with a donor to complete a pavilion project at Spring Creek Elementary School, and this is shown in attachment 5F.
So moved, Brant.
Leah, second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion? Lori?
Yes, there was a question raised at the facilities committee meeting. I raised a question at the facilities meeting about insurance. Did we find anything out about whether or not we have any concerns related to insurance happening with this student in this project?
Based upon the nature of this project in cooperation with the district's insurance would cover the project.
All right, Jim?
Yeah, just a request if we have a sign or something that acknowledges the Boy Scout, the Eagle project that it was from. Quite often materials are donated by local stores or warehouses. So if we could certainly acknowledge that too along in the sign, if there are any materials donated.
All right. Laurel?
Thanks. I'm wondering about the anticipated life cycle as well as the responsibility for ongoing maintenance once these projects are done.
In regard to
pavilion, a pavilion could be expected to last from 25 to 30 years. There's really no maintenance during that time frame. Perhaps after 25 years, if you wanted to keep it for a longer period of time, it could need a new roof at that point. But for the first 25 to 30 years, there should be no maintenance involved for a structure of this nature.
And the other ones, similarly, not a lot of upkeep or anything like that anticipated.
I'm assuming, yeah. Are you moving ahead through the other action items?
I was grouping them together, just asking the questions this initial time. But I can hold and ask those as we come to each one. With the pavilion, I was wondering specifically about the location and how many people it would hold.
Location hasn't been chosen yet. At a dimensions of 20 feet by 22 feet, you could probably assume 4 to 6 picnic tables for seating, which would be suitable for a class.
Okay.
That would be approximately.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering about, say classroom use, that type of thing. Okay, thank you very much.
All right. Any other questions on the pavilion? Okay. All right. Is there any public comment on this item? Then we'll have a roll call vote.
Mr. Fazard,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Yes.
Mr. Leos,
Yes.
Miss Sydney,
Yes.
Dr. Bader.
Yeah, sorry, I tried to use the space bar and it didn't work.
That's okay. Ms. Bedell,
Yes.
Ms. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion,
Yes.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Okay. That item has passed. Item G.
That was
is-
a yes.
Oh,
I
thank
got
you.
it.
Item G is a motion to authorize the administration to work with a donor to construct and install a sign at the Spring Creek Elementary School. And this is shown in attachment 5G.
So moved, Brant.
Duffy second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Questions or discussion on this item? I guess I have one question. Some of the commentary from the committee meeting in regard to the design, should we assume that that's probably being incorporated in those discussions then that the administration would be having with the PTO or with the person constructing it?
Yes, we have, we'll be forwarding those comments and recommendations to the building principal, who concurs in discussions with the PTO to be sensitive to those concerns.
Thank you. That'd be great. Laurel, did you have your hand up for this item or?
It seems to be fairly obvious that there's, from what Ed said earlier, that there's not really much anticipated upkeep with any of these items, so.
All right. Any other questions or discussion? Okay. Then is there any public comment? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Yes.
Mr. Leos,
Yes.
Miss Sydney,
Yes.
Dr. Bader,
Yes.
Ms. Bedell,
Yes.
Ms. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion,
Yeah.
Dr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Fazard.
Yes.
Okay. That item has passed. Item H is a motion to authorize the administration to work with donors to install a mural on the Coral Street Elementary School playground. And this is shown in attachment 5H.
So moved, Brant.
Duffy
Second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion on this item? Okay. Is there any public comment on this item? We'll have a roll call vote then.
Mr. Leos,
Yes.
Ms. Sydney,
Yes.
Dr. Bader,
Yes.
Ms. Bedell,
Yes.
Ms. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion,
Yes.
Dr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Fazard,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson.
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Item I is a motion to authorize permission to bid the water heater replacement project at Grays Woods Elementary School, as shown in attachment 5I.
So moved, Brant.
Adele second.
That's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion? Okay, any public comment? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Sydney.
Yes.
Dr. Okay. Dr. Bader,
Yes.
Ms. Bedell,
Yes.
Ms. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion,
Yes.
Dr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Fazard,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Yes.
Mr. Leos.
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Item J is a motion to approve repairs to the public address system at Mount Nittany Middle School by D'Agostino Electronic Services Incorporated in an amount not to exceed $50,000 as shown in attachment 5J.
So move, Brant.
Leah, second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion? Laurel.
Thanks. I wanted to check on this. So this memo mentions both a proposed repairs and anticipated replacement. Are they one and the same, or is this $50,000 project one that then will be followed up with the replacement valued at $40,000 to $60,000?
No, I apologize for using those terms interchangeably. They are one and the same.
Okay.
We are replacing the main control system, or the head end of the PA system, which amounts to a repair, but the project will be completed with this action.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we weren't spending $50,000 before we go and spend $40,000 to $60,000. And the other question was, you mentioned something in the memo about a proprietary nature of the project, and we've run into things before where it seems like we were locked into certain things that maybe were more expensive because something was proprietary. And so I just wanted a little more explanation of why that is.
Sure, because
we need that.
We aren't sure. The PA system consists of a front end or a control system that sits in the office, and from that system you have wires that go out to 100 locations around the building, and at each of those locations there's a speaker and a clock. As you might imagine, if we were to engage in replacing the entire system, which would be removing, thousands of feet of wire and hundreds of clocks and speakers, and installing a completely brand new system, you may be looking in excess of 100,000, probably $250,000 with, by the time you put labor into that degree of a system, full system replacement. This repair is simply to take the head end, the technology piece, control piece that sits in the office that's now 26 years old, and replace it with the more modern version that would equate to the same system. So that's why it's proprietary. You don't take an Acme system and plug a XYZ on the end of it and expect it to run. So it's the nature of this as being a repair as opposed to a wholesale replacement, that you can't shop around and find other front ends that are going to plug into the existing system.
Okay, thank you very much for explaining that.
Dan?
Ed, thank you. And thank you, Amber. Quick question, Ed. Is this a one-way system or a two-way system? In other words, can the teacher respond to the call from the main office through the system that goes back to the main office and they can communicate back and forth? Or is this only one way from the main office to the classroom?
So this particular system at Mount Nittany Middle School, the PA is one way, and communication back to the office happens through the phone system and not directly through the PA.
Okay, just asking. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other? Okay. Dan, I saw your hand go down and then up again, but you
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
It's down.
Sorry. I just didn't want to miss something. Okay. Is there any public comment on this item then? Okay, then we'll have a roll call vote.
Dr. Bader,
Yes.
Ms. Bedell,
Yes.
Ms. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion,
Yes.
Dr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Fazzard,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Yes.
Mr. Leos,
Yes.
Ms. Sydney.
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Item K is a motion to approve the MOU with the State College Area Education Association to address absences caused by the COVID-19 pandemic as shown in attachment 5K.
So move, Brant.
Leah, second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion? Okay, and then we will have a roll call vote. Oh, I'm sorry, Jim?
Well, I just wanted to say thanks to the team, for putting this together and to the association for working with us to get this done.
Okay, is there any public comment? Okay, then we will have a roll call vote.
Ms. Bedell,
Yes.
Ms. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion,
Yes.
Dr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Fazard,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Yes.
Mr. Leos,
Yes.
Ms. Zidney,
Yes.
Dr. Bader.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
I appreciate Linda and Shay for working out the language on that. Thank you.
thank you. Okay, so moving on now from action items, the next item on our agenda, item A, under information discussion, is the 2021-2022 school calendar. And this is shown in attachment 6A. I'll turn it over to Dr. O'Donnell for this item.
Before I turn it over to Dr. Stout, I'd just like to share that the calendar proposal includes meeting our contractual obligations and balancing the feedback, as well as competing interests from around our community, and ensuring that we're carrying out our state-required student academic days. As per board policy, I'm supporting this proposed calendar for next year, and I also want to say that I appreciate everybody who's shared feedback from our committee, as well as Dr. Stout and Mr. Bach for all that they've done to analyze this, count up all the details that make this go. And now I'll ask Will to go ahead and share an overview of the proposal, and then we'll field questions. So thank you, Will.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. O'Donnell. Just wanted to mention to the board, this is the fourth iteration of our proposed calendar before it's coming to you tonight. So I do want to thank the calendar committee. We spend a lot of time looking at it, and I would agree with what Dr. O'Donnell said. I think this is a really sound calendar educationally for our students moving into next school year, particularly given all of the changes we had to make to this current calendar because of COVID. And as you recall, as a board, we normally bring this calendar to you in December, but we did ask to delay it several months just to have a better handle on COVID before we brought it forward. So just a couple things that I want to emphasize in this calendar compared to some of the other calendars that we've done before. But the first student day is scheduled for Tuesday, August 24th. That is 2 weeks prior to Labor Day. And as we've had discussions, we had a lot of discussions around that, whether we would start the week before Labor Day or 2 weeks before. And we strongly believe that we get more value instructionally with our students at the end of August, more value at the end of August instructionally than we get the later we move into June. So we prioritize that earlier starting date so that we could get out earlier in June. That said, the last student day is scheduled for Friday, June 3rd. Bob alluded to it earlier when we were talking about, snow days, and one of the newer things that we're proposing in this calendar, we're proposing keeping 5 snow makeup days in the schedule or in the calendar, 2 within the school year, and then 3 added on to the end. But the thing that's new for next year that we're proposing is that once we get beyond those 5 snow days built in the calendar, we're going to apply for flexible instructional days. So if we get beyond those 5 snow days in the calendar, we can use remote learning, and the state allows us to apply for up to 5 of those days. So that would give us a window of 10 snow days that we could incorporate into our calendar. Also, this is something new for next year. January 17th, Martin Luther King Day, will be a K-12 Act 80 day. We don't have many of those in the calendar, but that is going to be a day focused on professional learning, and we'll be focusing on equity and inclusivity throughout the district. And we just thought that's a really good, appropriate day to be focusing on equity and inclusivity work in our district. We're going to reinstitute the spring break next week or next year. That will be the week of March 7th. And then I'm going to call this the Scott Fazard clause. We're bringing a calendar to you this evening that has the last student day prior to commencement. So our commencement is scheduled for June 4th, and our last student day is scheduled for June 3rd. So those are some of the highlights in the proposed 2021-2022 schedule or calendar.
Thank you. Michaela, I see your hand raised.
I just wanted to say I thought it was awesome how he said they're going to have younger students learn about Martin Luther King Day for inclusivity. I thought that was nice.
Thank you. Scott?
Yeah, thanks, Will. I love seeing the last scheduled day. I know we may get longer, but I love seeing the last scheduled day. So I guess just two comments, probably not even questions. I guess one question being, so your reference to the flex days, is there any reason that we couldn't consider the flex days for anything after the 2 scheduled days that keep us still with a June 3rd completion date? So basically, instead of waiting for 5 days, could we do those flex days after, just 2 snow days? And I don't get me wrong, I know the likelihood is that we will have more than 2 snow days. I just didn't know whether there was a statutory requirement that you go 5 first before you get the flex days, or whether that could be a consideration.
Yeah, there's not a statutory requirement, and that could be at the administrative discretion. We typically try and put some snow makeup days into that next week as a placeholder to discourage people from scheduling vacation that week. But if we're looking at the winter and we have 2 snow days that we've had, and Bob would want to consider moving into the FIDS, the flexible instructional days, that's something that we could take a look at.
Okay. And then the only other question was just, going back to the full spring break, I thought it might be an opportunity considering what Penn State did this year, and with our, abbreviated spring break, if that might be an opportunity, for us to potentially break from that. And again, I know that that's an ages old discussion and conversation, and there are many facets on both sides that might argue that one is better. So I just didn't know whether there was any deeper consideration, or whether we just decided that we were going to go back to our prior model, knowing that that has worked in the past. Thanks.
I would argue it didn't work in the past, Scott. Sorry, but that's because we had a lot of data that we brought to the board when we made that change. And I do think we need to generate an updated administrative reg for that board policy. We're just unable to adhere to all of, the 12 or 13-year-old board resolution that was made, and or however old, I'm sorry. And so that we have an updated set of parameters for the committee and how they give us their feedback as we then bring you forward proposals. And this you could go at that issue, Scott, many different ways. There's no question that many people in our community are here because of Penn State, which is not just our largest employer, probably our largest employer times 10 or 15. And so, I do think when we didn't have the full spring break, we had a lot of attendance problems. And to say those were valuable days for all students, obviously you could argue that. So, but right now we left it in, obviously, in the proposal as the full week.
Yeah, and obviously, Bob, so thank you. And much less argument from me on this one, considering that the scheduled date is prior to commencement. So I do I truly believe that that's a good compromise relative to, making sure that our schedule is respectful of that. Thank you. Thanks for all the work you guys did.
Thanks. Any other questions or discussion? I really like, especially since next year I have a senior, so I'll be glad that he'll get his full year of school in before the school year ends. I think we might want to consider, I would certainly support, if we're going to look at the calendar policy to try to work in at least some prioritization of having graduation after this last scheduled day of school, to the extent possible. So, Laurel?
Yeah, could you just address the reasons that we have the February 28th date off? I'm looking at it being, a day off and then 4 days between that and spring break, which I know that we've gotten questions in the past about why don't you back them up, that type of thing. So if you could just explain the reason that it has to be there.
As I look at it, Laurel, what I'm surmising, and again, we've been through this so many times in different iterations, but it's a records day for elementary. So I'm assuming that's near the end of their trimester. So that would give them time to appropriately report student learning during that in-service day.
With the 25th being the
Correct.
That's correct.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's just, I wanted to make sure it was out there because I know it's a question we've gotten before when things fall that way. So thanks.
Yep.
And there was even a year where, or maybe even two, where we've had it on the day prior to spring break. And the decision was if we're going to have a work day during that break for our teachers, then that really changes their opportunities to have a break or not. So it's.
Yeah, I agree with that.
We've kept it in front of the week.
Any other discussion on this? All right, so moving on to item B, the budget development process for 2021-2022. This is shown in attachment 6B, and Randy Brown will lead this discussion here.
We've had a few iterations on this so far, and obviously when we look out into the future, there are so many things that are going to change, especially our knowledge of the economic recovery over the next few years. So Randy and I talked at length earlier about that, and we're going to know so much more as we move through the spring here, and we learn more about the state and federal government. So we know there's some moving parts here, and this update is where we are at this time with the development. So thanks to Randy and his team for all their ongoing work and iterations here. So I'll turn it over to Randy.
Thank you, Dr. O'Donnell. And Donna's here tonight, not just to support, but also to answer questions and provide guidance, especially whenever I'm unable to keep track of the many moving parts here that we have going on in our budget proposal. I'm going to share my screen so that I can present the document for those at home or for board members that aren't able to follow along with both screens. Our budget proposal, this right now currently stands at $164 million and change. 105,709 and change is related to real estate tax revenue. And so because of that large amount, focused or coming from real estate tax revenue, we're going to talk a little more than normal tonight, and we've been doing so in committee meetings about real estate and the various moving parts because of the economic issues that we're dealing with. Normally, we have a assessed value growth at 1.4% over the last 5 years and 1.26% over the last 10 years. So normally we budget an increase of 1.2%. In the next 2 years, we're talking about an increase of only 0.8 and 0.6% respectively. And that is related to the large number of assessed value appeals that we have already experienced in the current year, which will take effect in next fiscal year, as well as based upon real estate market values, talking with our assessor, county assessor, and then in multiple conversations we've had at committee and citizens advisory committee, we are expecting even more appeals, as well as slowed growth from additions to the assessed value. So that growth in assessed value is a net number. It would be, the positive part would be added properties to our assessed value. And obviously, the larger the commercial property, the larger the increase in assessed value. There are quite a number of properties, just as there have been over the last couple of years, that have really added to our assessed value, namely some large buildings in the downtown area. And then both this year and in the next year, we expect some additions out on Whitehall Road, namely the yards. And as well, real estate development, obviously, residential also adds to our assessed value growth, but that has not been as frequent as has been in recent years. So that is why we are backing off of that value, and that estimated growth makes a significant difference when we're projecting new revenue. Because assessment appeals are very important, more so than they have been recently, just as to reiterate or to bring everyone up to the same knowledge base, September 1 is the deadline to file an assessment appeal with the County Board of Assessments for the next fiscal year. So all of the assessment appeals that will affect us in fiscal year 21-22 had to be been applied for and been received by September 1 of 2020. And so we have a pretty good idea of what those appeals look like. Many of them have been solved or resolved, but there are still some that are outstanding, and we've provided some detail there for you. Don't think we need to go through that anymore unless there's any questions. The tax rate is also a big determinant of the, obviously, especially a change in the tax rate in the real estate tax revenue. In the current year, there has been no change in the tax rate from the prior year. And in FY 21-22, we are looking at no change to the tax rate at this point in time. We have included, based upon economic conditions, a 1% increase for 22-23, and then we return to the average of 2% per year each year following. And that is very close to our 10-year average as well, minus the tax increases for the referendum that had occurred several years ago, two consecutive years. The collection percentage is the final piece, and typically, I don't know that we've ever had a year where we collected 100% of our tax, and the large reason for that is the vast majority of our real estate revenue comes in the discount period. So then your collection percentage can only start at 98%. Typically, our average over the last 10 years has been 97.1. In 2021, we have been fortunate to receive 97.1, which was surpassed our goal or our budget of 95%. We are only assuming a 96% collection rate because of continued economic pressures and in a prolonged challenging environment, not only for the real estate taxpayer, but also for the commercial property owner. Moving on to earned income tax, we do have a 10% reduction budgeted for this year based upon last year's revenue. And so far, we are seeing a reduction. Has not panned out to be 10% of a loss yet, but it is still too early since only one full quarter of real estate tax revenue, of earned income tax revenue has been received to date. We will continue to update that. The next 2 years we are expecting would remain flat, and then we would go back to our 5 and 10 year averages, which normally exceed 3%. Realty transfer tax has exceeded our budgeted expectations for this year. But in the next 2 years, we are budgeting at our lowest amount that we received in the previous 5 years. Again, just because of the economic uncertainty, especially in the last several years, there have been some large buildings that have changed hands and created a large transfer. And so until we have more certainty and understanding of the environment and the return of Penn State, we have that's what we've budgeted. Delinquent real estate has been reduced over the next several years. I'm sorry, had been reduced over the last several years based upon higher than expected real estate collections in the current year, excuse me. Interim real estate, we have a good understanding because we know what was billed on July 1 and then what also was billed on February 1st. And so we have estimated that collection and then we've returned our estimates to $600,000 for the next several years, which is the lowest in the last 5 years. Again, interim would be when a new property comes on in the middle of the tax year, and so it's based upon when the property comes on and the value of the property. Tuition revenue is primarily related to our SEAL revenue for our before and after school program, and we've adjusted those amounts to reflect our programming that we expect to occur. Obviously, we're at a significantly reduced capacity this year. We expect our capacity to be a little bit larger this summer, but not at the full expectation of a normal programming year. And then in the following year, we expect to be fully running, and however, keeping rates level for the next several years. And then miscellaneous other revenue, athletics, building use, driver ed, those all have been compromised because of the pandemic. And we expect that for the next couple of years, there may be some reductions in service there. Expenses, really, there's not a lot of change in our expense projections to date. That's where we expect to spend the bulk of our time in the next couple of months. Salaries and benefits, including healthcare and PSERS, we are reflecting estimated impact of our contractual agreements. We assume pre-COVID staffing levels, which we hope that to better understand our programming needs and through updated enrollment projections, as well as course selection at the secondary level in the coming months. We'll also need to monitor, to the best of our ability, any opportunities for using efficiencies. However, we also have our classroom guidelines to take into account. We also need to make sure that we are prepared to the best of our ability with an appropriate ed model. Obviously, our ed model this year looks nothing like our ed models have in previous years. We do have a factor in for a virtual academy, like similar to what we've done in the past, or this year, excuse me, but not to the same level. And we're hopeful that that will be sufficient to meet all of our programming needs. Does have an inclusion of a 0.5 social worker that was grant funded this year. It assumes, I mentioned the virtual academy at both levels, and then also an increase of health insurance of 15%. Pre-COVID level of expenses throughout the district at this point in time, assuming a full SEAL and summer programming, except for this coming summer that needs to be updated. I apologize. We would like to purchase school buses this summer for next school year. There is a limited capital reserve transfer. We do have to account for debt service, other IT and networking costs, eliminate the COVID expenses. We believe that most of those will be able to be eliminated, but we will need to monitor that more closely. At this point, if there are some significant expenses, we hope that there'll be additional federal funding available, or that we are able to fund those through contingency, and then also utilities. So I'm going to blow this up a little bit so that you can hopefully see it a little bit better. Chart 1 is a summary. The first line of this chart is the ending fund balance by fiscal year. As you can see at the top of of the chart that we had in December of 2020. And as you can see, we started out with a projected ending fund balance in fiscal year 2021 of $12.5 million. At current, with our projections, we're looking at a negative fund balance in the amount of $16 million in 25-26. Obviously, we have some work to do, but there is great amount of uncertainty, probably more than any of us have ever experienced in our careers. In February, we've updated our projections. We still begin with an ending fund balance of, this is unassigned fund balance in our general fund of $12.5 million. But because of some revenue that has been higher in the current year, and then have updated some of our projections in those projection years, ending fund balance is still a negative at just under $14 million. And you can see the net change throughout each of those time periods. So as I said, we have some work to do. One of the discussion items at the CAC for Finance, which I'm sure that Ms. Zidney can speak to if you'd like to hear from a fellow board member, was what impact would a 1% tax increase in the budget year of 21-22 have on that loss of fund balance in the out years. So again, we start with the December estimated ending fund balance, and we go to February with this 1% tax increase in 21-22, and we still have a loss of $8 million. So it does cut that loss in half, because that 1% is it does build, or it builds the millage rate, and then that stays in. And that is the only change in the between the chart 1 and chart 2 for those projection years. So I just wanted we wanted to provide that as an example, and share that we are very much working very hard to understand not only our revenue, but now we're going to be working to understand our expenses and what is the appropriate level of those expenses to be. If revenue comes out higher than what we expected and faster than what we have projected, that will obviously give us a better situation. If it does not, then we have some work to do. And probably the best case that we can expect right now is that we're pretty close, but we still need to do some homework. And we have fund balance in the next year or two, but it's never been our projection, unless it's a planned use of fund balance dedicated for a specific purpose, to use fund balance in a planned way. I did include a link for a document that is posted on our budget development webpage that does include a summary of the governor's proposal. As Mr. Hutchinson mentioned, there is a big commitment in the governor's proposal for education. Whether that will come to fruition and how that is funded obviously remains to be seen. At previous meetings, not only board, but also committee meetings, we've talked about the local revenue impact. We have collected some data from CBICC and the COG. However, because of lack of time to understand that data more clearly, after the committee meeting, we decided to do some more homework, and we just didn't have a chance to share that with you this evening, but we'll continue to work on that. So just this page in the presentation is a summary of the bullet points that I went through about the revenue, especially the real estate and the earned income tax. There's some typical charts there that if you would like to see our historical averages and then some of the projected years, feel free to peruse those. The tax collection percentage, as I said, the budget in 2021, where you can see it's only at 95%. We did have actual collections at 97%, and that was an additional $2 million that we are going to be receiving in our revenue this year higher than what we had expected. But that is just a one-year flow of cash. It does not build on in the future years. Earned income tax, like I said, this is a point of concern for us. With that loss of potentially 10%, earned income tax is about $17 million. So, you know, a 10% cut is about $1.7 million. And we are, you know, watching that very closely with our tax collector. Transfer tax revenue, again, that greatly exceeded our projections. The graph here does make it look very large. That difference is $1 million. But again, that is just a one-time source of revenue. It does not carry over. The delinquent real estate, as you can see, it's not varying that much. It's, you know, the variations are only a couple $100,000, but they are running a little bit higher this year than we had expected. Historical interim real estate tax, again, this one we really missed the mark on, I guess you could say. But again, we don't have any data at budget time to know what the interims are going to look like for July and the following February of that next fiscal year. So we were basing it on projects being slowed down especially because of the construction halt during the spring and early summer of last year. And so this is a summary of the fund balance activity. And this is where you can get, this is back, or this is an update, the February update with a 0 tax increase. And you can see where I'm trying to highlight here is the negative $14 million in the out years. On this slide is the 1% tax increase, and you can see that that $13 million does decrease to $8 million. So our next steps will be meeting with the Finance Committee and the CAC on March 10th again, and then we'll have another update for you at the March 15th board meeting. If there's any new information or we have some questions in the meantime, we also have that March 1st board meeting to get some feedback or input from you. But we have definitely found that the committee meetings have been very invaluable to gaining information so that we can provide, and sharing information so that we can provide an even more in-depth update for you at the board meetings. Donna, is there anything that you'd like to share from your perspective or anything that you think I might have missed?
No, I don't think so, Randy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I see Lori's hand up.
Thanks for that presentation. So just in entertaining the idea of a 1% tax increase and the effect that it has on the fund balance, what conditions do you anticipate would need to be in place for us to even consider having a 1% tax increase? Or is that just for illustrative purposes and that's not even on the table?
So it's a very good question, because I'd really like to say that a 1% tax increase is not necessary, to be respectful of all of our taxpayers, community members who, you know, I don't know anybody that hasn't been affected by the pandemic in the last year. So but I will say that when we build a 10-year projection, and graciously you all have agreed to allow us to focus more finely in this time period at only a 5-year projection. However, you know, that doesn't mean that we're not looking at the 10 years, but even if we look at that 5 years, if revenues don't turn around, remember that because of the Act 1 index, you can only raise taxes by so much in any 1 year. And once, so therefore, you know, not to be trite about it, but once a tax increase is foregone, it can be considered foregone monies. I know that we're talking about people's bank accounts. I know that we're talking about personal lives here. So I'm not meaning that to be insensitive in any way, but we've built our projections using an average, a historical average of our tax rate of increase. And so many of our costs do not stay stagnant or are not in our control, such as PSERS. Healthcare is in our control to the ability at which you're able to negotiate healthcare arrangements with our bargaining unit associations. But even once those plans are negotiated, then there's a wide range of impacts that each of those plans can be affected by each year. So there's many things that you don't control in your budget, and based upon services to students can vary from no additional cost to $100,000 depending on the student needs. We've worked very hard on a capital plan, and I did mean to show a slide on that, and I'll go back to that in a minute. But it was meant to be illustrative, but honestly, as your finance team looks at it, I think that it is something that not necessarily should be considered, but at least it should be thought about, and it should be contemplated as to balancing long-term effects of the pandemic and revenue shortfalls, because we don't know where they're going to fall into place. However, also the rising costs of providing our educational program and additional costs. We have been very fortunate. We've received almost $4 million in federal funding, which is we're very thankful for. And some of our costs are higher this year than we had budgeted, but some of our costs are now being funded by that money. So what we're doing is any extra resources that we have, we're putting into fund balance, that unassigned general fund balance, to help us out in even a greater way with those revenue shortfalls. And that's part of the way that we're getting down from that $16 million loss of fund balance down to 12 or 13 million, whichever number it was. So we're not being willy-nilly and just spending just because we get that extra money. We're using it for its intended purpose. And then if there's resources that are in our budget that are left over, we are holding those at this point in that unassigned fund balance for the future. So I think that it is a very difficult question. I think it's honestly a complex answer.
Thanks, Randy.
Scott?
Yeah, had discussions at length in Finance Committee regarding the budget and kind of what it means and what it entails. And I think the reality of where we are and the impact of the pandemic and all aspects thereof and how it impacts Penn State and tourism and athletics and football games and all of the things that drive a college town's local economy. We don't have, we have a revenue issue, but we don't have a revenue issue that we can really control because of the impact of the pandemic. And really, at this point in time, we have primarily a cost issue, and that doesn't, I think to Randy's point, that doesn't mean that we've been spending money wantonly and not being prudent with taxpayer dollars, but it means that we can't tax our way out of this. We're going to have to find ways to minimize, cut, control expenses, whatever, however we want to approach that. So I think that all of the information that Randy presented, especially the grid with the 5 years, really we had conversations in finance about really focusing on the fact that this is largely a $26 to $28 million swing in a 5-year period, depending on what parameters you want to try to use in that conversation. Meaning a swing from a $12 million positive fund balance to a negative $16 million, $14-16 million fund balance. So, we've got some tough decisions facing us. Randy and Donna have some tough number crunching to work through to see how we can make it all work out. But I think it's prudent for us to be showing all scenarios. So Lori, to your question about the 1%, whether that was more of an illustration or a recommendation, gee, I mean, it could be a little bit of both at this stage of the process, but it's really, I think, intended to just show what the impact is of a decision one way or the other, and it's going to be up to us and the finance, the administration finance team to try to come up with what is going to make sense that gets us through this enormous hurdle that we have. So there's no easy answer on this. There's no easy button. And Randy, I do appreciate you guys adding the different elements of the conversation and questions that were raised in Finance Committee. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much. You guys are doing a great job so far.
Yeah. So thank you for all the detail in this presentation. So one of the questions or concerns I had was in the section on expense assumptions, where it mentions eliminating COVID related expenses. And I'm not sure, what items might be included or not included in that, and how we can be sure that we're not still going to be in a situation in the fall in which many of the mitigation measures that might be expense items now wouldn't still be necessary. I don't necessarily have any comment on the percent tax increase, because I think I'd prefer to be a little further along in the process before taking a particular position on that. But
yeah, I understand that, and I do appreciate that you've indulged us in having that conversation about a potential tax increase, because I think that will be very thought-provoking, and that it's something that will give you time and opportunity as board members to evaluate, and maybe you'll hear some community feedback as well. I
guess I'd like to understand a little more about what we might have coming from the state and federal government as well over the next month or so. Maybe we'll have a better sense of what we can
Understood.
expect.
Yeah. Again, as far as mitigation costs and COVID expenses, I don't know when, but it probably won't be at the beginning of next school year that we'll need to continue, that we'll be able to stop doing the disinfecting. But that's a minor drop in the bucket compared to the extra space we've needed to rent to store furniture because we needed to clear out classrooms. We've bought a lot of site licenses and curriculum materials this year because of mitigation again. Some of those, I think that a large part of those either will go away or will be modified and become part of our normal plan, and then we'll replace other expenditures in some ways that we normally would have incurred. And then there are some that maybe we've made an assumption will continue. And at this point, because we haven't taken the time, and I don't think it'd be prudent to go through all of the mitigation costs that we've had and determine which ones we think we need to budget for and which ones we don't. But we do have a contingency, and like the massive amounts of plexiglass and other things that we've had to install, that won't go away. Again, that's expenses that we will be able to, or those are items that we'll be able to use in the future. So I know I'm not giving you a lot of specifics, but that it's just kind of a generalization of where we are.
And I think we now have a better understanding of what mitigation measures are effective and which are less important, like disinfecting surfaces we now know is less critical than ventilation issues, for instance, that we know now that we know more about transmission. So maybe we'll be able to be more focused in where we're putting resources. I guess, and then the other part of my question was that it assumes pre-COVID levels of staffing. And we know that we approved hiring a number of elementary teachers for this year so that we would be able to accommodate remote classrooms that were remote only. And I guess one of my questions is, I would want to make sure that there aren't maybe assumptions about our educational model that might be present in our expense budgeting at this point that aren't explicit, if that makes sense. Not that I'm expecting that we would continue running this teacher to student ratio we have now, because I think that was part of that is a result of the timing in which we added those remote classrooms. And hopefully next year, as whatever measures we need to take, we'll be able to be potentially a little more strategic, since we have much more lead time in developing those plans. But to ensure that as we're thinking about those kind of expenses, that we're sure we understand the implications.
And that's why I was explicit in mentioning that we have budgeted for a virtual academy model. Again, we don't know what that exactly looks like, but it's somewhere between where we were and where we are now. And so maybe all of those resources won't be needed in the virtual academy, but they may be needed in some sort of in-person academy, in-person model. So I believe that we've built some things there that will be very helpful to us. So, but I appreciate the question, and it's something that we're continuing to work on and look at.
So I guess is the answer that there's still flexibility within this budget in terms of what the educational model will look like for next year. It just could be shifting resources from one area to another.
I don't think it has as much flexibility as this year. I mean, when we spent, we hired 18 teachers for 1-year contracts. I mean, if we're going to build that, that's not built in.
Right.
So, but we are looking at 1920 levels, which is pretty fortunate. And I think this plan, because of the way we're utilizing reserves, does enable us to work forward without reducing programs for students. And obviously we're hopeful that the economic recovery in our region is better than what we're predicting. But, so that's why my comments on the front end, we know we're going to have to make some changes to what happens. The ed model, I hope we don't have to put teachers and students in the hybrid system again in the fall, but it really is contingent upon whether 6 feet is still required. And obviously we're hoping that it's not. And if it's not, then, that gives us a lot more flexibility for what we're able to do with the ed model. No question. So.
Thanks.
I did want to show one more thing, if you don't mind. I'm looking at page 25 of the attachment, and I'll make it as large as I can. But this is from the Capital Reserve Fund analysis, multi-year projection. And as I said, we in the current year, 2021, we are not projecting a transfer into the Capital Reserve Fund. And in 1920, we only did $1.8 million, which was down from our budget, and excess fund balance that we had last year was kept in the general fund to help with any future year general fund losses. Our budget in 21-22, we only have 198,000, and before we return to our normal schedule of about 2.5 million or so. This does still include a middle school project starting in about 27-28, or at least that's when the debt would start. It does also include almost $10 million or so for athletic recreation facilities. And so by the end of the 10-year period here, we are looking at a fund balance of $31 million. So I don't think that these assumptions are far off. They obviously need more discussion than just the finance team making a recommendation. And we want to be talking about these with you, but I just thought we'd revisit them and keep them in mind, and so that you can be aware of them whenever we talk about not completing a capital reserve transfer, what that means and where that falls into play.
Randy, for that last discussion. I mean, obviously how that interfaces with our capital projects, and obviously those numbers would change because we know that we've been planning and looking at the potential for Park Forest Middle School in that direction, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Just for people that are trying to follow along here, there's some real moving parts there.
Yep. So again, I appreciate all of the board members' times. I know that many of you have been checking in the finance committee meeting, and I appreciate that because I think it's a good time for us to have those conversations, and anytime the capital items will carry over into facilities, we'll have those conversations there as well.
Laura?
Thanks. I did want to, follow up on both Randy and Scott in terms of mentioning that we have gotten a lot of input from our, both in finance committee meetings, but also from our CAC, and especially looking out at the long term and balancing the concerns that we have about people's current economic situations and our whole community's situation, and being respectful of that. And also being respectful of the need to think long term and not just push things down the road, as Scott was talking about, that these aren't just problems that we can sort of make go away easily by postponing decisions and revenue.
All right, any other comments or questions? All right, thank you, Randy. And Donna as well. I know this is a team effort. So. Then moving on to item C under policy development, we'll be looking at a draft version for revisions to policy 6 on meetings. And this is shown in attachment 6C. And I guess I'll turn it over to Linda Pierce to do an overview of the draft we have. Oh, Linda, you're muted.
Of course, I didn't want people to feel, alone. You might remember when we reviewed this in November that we have suggested changes to this policy from 2 sources. One from PSBA. They were as a result of PSBA reviewing our policies. And those are the changes that are bold and underlined. And then there's also some committee recommendations that are in bold italics. The main source of discussion at the November meeting, we had a couple of areas where we had choices. Do we want number 1 or number 2 or number 3? So following that, we asked board members to give us some information. We did receive a little bit of information of input and have reduced the number of options accordingly. I don't know the best way to proceed. I could go right to the first. Yeah. Why don't we just discuss it section by section? In the parliamentary authority, there's the changes because of PSBA, but the italicized section, the district solicitor shall be designated as the parliamentarian, was a committee suggestion. Does anybody want to discuss this change? Okay. And then we have definition of quorum. And again, this is the PSBA language. And the same with the presiding officer. And then under notice, the committee suggested finding other ways of communication, other than existed 20 or 30 years ago. So we're suggesting adding digital or electronic media to the forms of communication. Same thing in number 5, adding email to the options.
Linda?
Yes.
I just wanted to make sure that people are aware when we talk about the via digital electronic, that is a comma and a list. So in other words, we are still required, as I understand it by state law, to do certain things in the newspaper. We're not proposing changing that. We're saying this is an additional way that we can
Correct.
notify people. Is that correct?
Correct. Newspaper has not been crossed out.
Yep. Thanks.
Then we have the regular meetings section, the special meetings section.
Yeah, question on the regular meeting. Who is defined as an officer of the board? I mean, we have a board treasurer, correct?
Yes, yeah. And I think in some districts, they have a board member serve that role, but we have our
Yeah.
finance director.
I mean, I just want to be clear, and I mean, we're not talking about the removal of a board member. We're not talking about the removal of, a board position. So I think we want to maybe clarify that, even if it's with example type language, so that there's no confusion on that one. Because the only board officer I'm aware of would be the board secretary and the board treasurer.
I will, I'll give PSBA a call and just be absolutely sure of what that is and provide an example.
I think board officers, Scott, would be the traditional president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. Removal of them as an officer would not constitute removal of them. Those who would serve as board members would not constitute removal of them as a board member as well. There would be different criteria potentially for that.
So perhaps that could just be tweaked and added to that it's removal from a position, so to speak, not necessarily removal from the board, whatever that might be.
Right.
I don't have a problem with the paragraph. It's just a little bit of clarification.
Gotcha. I'll do that.
Thanks.
We did some rewrite to public participation. Does anybody have any questions or want to discuss that paragraph?
So I had a couple. So does this paragraph basically reflects what the state requires of us, right?
It's a little of both. There's a lot of committee language in here.
Mm-hmm. I guess I don't necessarily have a concern with what's written here, but I do wonder if we might want to take a look at the public participation policy. It's like 900 something, and just make sure that there's consistent language between this policy and that policy in regard to public participation. So maybe once we finalize this policy, we might want to put that on the policy committee agenda.
I just made note of that. Then we have the very long voting section.
I had a question here too. Sorry, I probably should have attended them. Well, I'm not on that committee, but I think I was not there last time this was discussed. So there's this addition here, I'm trying to find it now, in regard to abstention from voting. And said,
that is way down.
oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah,
No, that's fine. Oh, it's actually, it's its own section.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, this adds an additional piece of language saying abstentions are permitted only for the reasons listed above. And that is a piece of, that would be a policy change from our policy in that address abstentions. We don't prohibit them at this point. We just require them under the conditions in which they're required. So I guess my question is, do we want to prohibit abstentions?
Well, this was a committee recommendation. Lori, do you want to talk about the committee discussion? It was a while ago, so I'm guessing your memory's a little foggy, just like mine, but.
It was a while ago. I think it may have been last spring even. Yeah, I feel like we were even going to speak with Scott Etter about this. And maybe we did speak with Scott Etter about this.
We did speak with Scott, yeah.
Yeah. So Scott, do you recall whether or not this was something that was recommended that we say, or?
I don't know that excuse me. I don't know that I used that particular phrase itself. I know I can recall sending Amber, resending my stock opinion on abstention by the board. You have articulated the reasons that are considered to be valid, and my position as a solicitor for a number of years has always been that you're elected as board members and you should vote on subjects where you are not prohibited by law from doing so. But when push comes to shove, board members cannot be compelled to vote on something if they, for whatever reason, choose not to do so. So I view that language as aspirational on our part, and I think it's appropriate in a policy because, as I said, I think you, as board members, should vote when items come and you're not precluded by law from doing so. So as a relatively circular way of getting back to it, I support the language, recognizing that if a board member absolutely refuses to vote, there's not a whole lot that the other board members can do.
Yeah, thanks for that recap. That's a good refresher. I remember that now.
Okay. Hey, I don't know who's, I had my hand raised. Amber, I didn't know whether you were calling on people or not. I agree with the question on that. And my pause on it, if we could tweak that wording to be something along the lines of, the board in general expects that abstentions will not occur except for the reasons mentioned above, I think that's absolutely fine. But I don't think we should put something in the policy that's not enforceable. And to Scott's point, while we might all strive for that, as I think you used the words aspirational, I think that makes a lot of sense. But I don't know that we should put something knowingly, so to speak, in a policy that we know in the end, we end up can't enforcing. So that would be my only thought on that item. I did have another question. Once we're done with that one though.
I get, just to respond to your point, Scott, I think, it almost creates a situation in which a board member in a meeting might, take a restroom break when a vote is coming up if they're prohibited from abstaining, which seems like a roundabout way of approaching this. So I think more the if the language was said, it's expected, but I'm not sure about prohibiting abstentions in policy.
Okay. I captured what Scott said.
Okay. Scott, you had further.
Actually, I see Dan's hand raised. I don't know whether you can see that.
Dan?
Yeah. The section above abstention had a choice that we were trying to address. That has to do with the agenda item originally placed on the agenda under the heading of information discussion being moved to an action item. and under what circumstances that would apply. We narrowed it down to two choices that we might use. The first, I think, was that the agenda item could be moved to action by an affirmative vote of a majority of board members who are present, or an agenda item that is originally placed in the agenda under the heading of information discussion may be moved to an action item unless such move is objected to by two or more board members who are present. And I think the first of the two seems to me is a little more liberal than the second. The second one seems more narrow. But I'd be interested in other people's opinion about that.
Jim?
Yeah, I sort of think, the way we do it now seems to be by unanimous consent. And I think it's important that, part of the agenda building process, that we elect our president and vice president for, is to come up with items that we think that are urgent and that might not have to have might be too timely to require an information discussion and then an action vote at the next meeting. The other thing is that I think when substantial items are in the information discussion, they're there for a reason, and they're there not only for the board to discuss them, but also the community to reflect on those, and maybe at the next meeting, when they go to action, is to weigh in on them. So that I think it should be rare that we move something from info discussion to action. So I'm leaning more toward either unanimous consent or the at least two, instead of the majority of the board there, because it's also a matter of transparency, right? We often see something will get on the board as information discussion, and then the following week we'll get a lot of email or interactions about it saying, hey, what do you know about this, or what do you think about this? And I think that's an important part of community engagement. And that's why I think it should be rare that we move something from info discussion to action, and should require a higher threshold than the simple majority.
Scott?
Yeah, thank you. I think I agree with Jim. I would support the second item, which is the two or more. I wouldn't support unanimous consent, because the only reason is if 8 people agree it should be moved to action, I don't think one person should be able to hijack the will of the board from that standpoint. However, maybe it's somewhat hypocritical, I don't know, but on the other hand, I would be fine with 2 people doing it, because at least then there are 2 people involved in that consideration. And interestingly, Jim, I agree. We have, it should be rare instances. However, we've also identified certain instances that are commonly moved to action, but we've done that as a matter of course. So, outside of those select few items that as a past practice, again, we don't always, but we have a high level of comfort moving things to action. Other items would be much more rare. I do think it's just important, again, whether it's community members, whatever, that moving something to action, if you have quorum, then you're still subject to the voting requirements to pass an action item. So you might have quorum, you might try to move something to action and might not have enough people per the requirements of the policy to actually pass an action item, because you don't have 2/3 or something like that. So, all of those things are all, I think to your point, Jim, they're protections, they're transparency items that even if we move it to action, it still falls under the rest of the voting requirements, for the board relative to actually passing it. So yeah, I would definitely support the second of the two of the items in 5, which would be to have 2 or more board members who are present.
Lori?
Yeah, my thinking on this over time has changed, which I think speaks to perhaps needing to have needing that narrower path. I agree with what Scott and Jim said. I think 2 is a good number. I hear what Jim said regarding unanimous consent, but I think Scott's point about, feeling very strongly that something can move and, by whatever circumstance happened, it didn't end up directly on action and it needed to go to information first, but we should move swiftly. I wouldn't want one person to hold that process up if the rest of us felt in good conscience that it should move forward.
Laurel?
Yeah, I've been trying to find, I do want to address this, but I know that at one point we had 4 options listed and I cannot find that memo now. Does anyone, I thought it was the last iteration that we had seen and I simply can't find it now.
It was the last iteration, yes.
Do you have the date for that? I'm sorry that I couldn't.
November 16.
Okay, because I had been addressing, that was what I had been addressing and speaking with people about it. And that did have an option. I didn't realize they had been narrowed down already from 4 options to 2. That option at the time spoke about it can be moved to action by the affirmative vote of all board members who are present, which is similar to that unanimous consent. And I feel strongly about that pretty much for the reasons that Jim articulated, specifically about transparency. I mean, it's our job as board members and as the administration to make sure that urgent items are put where they need to be so people know. And in the very rare case that something comes up, I think if one board member somehow, even one board member felt it wasn't that urgent, then that needs to be respected because we each come with a view and we might know something that hasn't been able to be communicated yet. In general, these have all been fairly pro forma. They've almost always been situations where, say, a student is requesting, a grad student wants to do a study and we want to help them get started as soon as possible. But even there, I remember early on when I was on the board, there was some question and it was, hey, can we move this forward? And one person said no. And so we held it. And sure enough, there were some valid things to look at more deeply. That has happened. By the same token, we've had some things that were even major expenses that the administration says to us, really, this is the reason why we need to move ahead. And we have done so, and everyone has respected that. So.
Amy?
So the observation that I'll make, and personally, I'm fine. I have thoughts about it, but I'm fine with either of these 2 options. And I do think it's important that we narrow to fewer things than 5 choices, because I think that's too difficult for us as 10 people to parse through, or 9 votes. So I'm quite fine with either of these 2 potential outcomes. I think the reason that we talked a lot about changing our practice was because there was some cultural push-pull issues about where things get put on the agenda by leadership. So in the short time that I've participated in leadership and my time on the board, I actually disagree. I have seen there be times where something was put on as an action item and there was pushback about why it wasn't on first as info discussion. I can't enumerate an answer, but I deep in my gut can recall experiencing that. So certainly with some simple things like where we needed to get a contract in place to meet some kind of mandated obligation, there's never been any dissent from the board on those sorts of issues. But I can recall experiences in agenda planning where we've talked about where something should go on the agenda, and have been concerned that while there was a need to be very timely, that it would be poorly received if placed immediately to action and not placed on info discussion initially. So I think we've got to talk about some cultural norms then. If the statement is going to be that we're going to trust leadership and administration to decide if something has to go directly on action, then there has to be some good faith efforts that's how it's going to be received. So that's just an observation I have. So it's a little bit of a two-way street, right? If we're going to demand high levels of transparency and that we're going to not want things to have to be moved from info discussion to action, then there has to be confidence that things put on action are needed to be there, if that makes sense. So I hope that was clear.
Yeah, I think it does. That kind of gets to a dilemma that, we either, if we have to have unanimous consent to move things from info discussion to action, it puts a little more pressure to potentially sometimes put items on as action initially rather than information discussion if there's a concern about timeliness. And maybe that's maybe that's okay, because that means then that people in the public realize, oh, this is action, this may be voted on, so we need to, give our opinions now. But I guess personally, I would be comfortable with if two people object, or, that's I think a potentially a better, healthier dynamic than just having one person objecting, preventing something from moving. And I also think it should be weighted carefully and thoughtfully when something is moved from info discussion to action, for the reasons Jim had enumerated about making sure the public is given a chance to weigh in on items before they're voted on. Okay, Jim, I think you're next.
Sure, just a couple follow-ups, and I to Amy's point, one of the reasons we elect board leadership and have the superintendent and board leadership do the agenda committee is because we are saying we implicitly trust you to prioritize those things, or which have sufficient urgency that they just have to go right to action, and so I don't have any problem with that in terms of it. I've rarely seen said, well, why wasn't that on info discussion first? The other point that I'd like to make with regard to, I did say that it should be rare, and Scott brought up a point, that there are some things that we routinely do this with. And I think, if obviously, if we think back on it, it's mostly like Laurel said, there are research studies which require researchers to interact with our students or our teachers, and to use them for data. And the sooner that they can get started, the sooner that the student can accomplish the requirements for his or her degree, or get the study, if it's a longitudinal study, set it up that much more time to get it done. So generally, my personal criterion for those is if they've successfully passed the institutional review board review of the study, which is what is required before you can start doing human subjects. It used to be a human subject called a human subject review. But my personal criterion for those is not to make the graduate student or the faculty member come back a second time when those are, if they've already satisfied some of the requirements of doing a human subjects research study, I'm fine with that. And that's what I would say would be the routine situation where I would advocate for something going from info discussion to action. But like I said, for substantive items that come before the board, changing out a student information system, dealing with some things about a building or replacement, the playgrounds, those things certainly would require an info discussion before action, and also that provides an opportunity for community engagement and community field feedback. So I will say that for substantive items, I would want it to be rare. For things like research studies, I would still support routinely moving those from info discussion to action, as so long as the correct procedures are checked off, you know, from the sponsoring institution. Thanks.
Gretchen?
Thanks, Amber. I just wanted to say something very briefly, which is I just keep going back to the 5 Ps that I was always taught, which is poor planning produces poor product. And so if there's somebody in administration who needs a contract to be approved, or if there's an academic that needs their PhD thesis to be approved, these people can plan ahead. And so I would tend to agree with Laurel that even one vote should suffice, because poor planning produces poor product. And you need to do that whether you're an academic or an administrator within SCASD. And if you do your job with full responsibility, then if there's an exception, I know that this board and any future board would, of course, understand that and make an exception. But otherwise, there's no need to rush things because things can be planned. Thanks.
I see Laurel and Scott both have a hand up. I'm not sure who was the last to speak. Scott, I think it's probably your turn.
Actually, I think it's Laurel's turn.
Okay, either way.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to elaborate a little more on that transparency idea. And it actually goes to exactly what was brought up in terms of if you're in agenda planning and you're discussing and there's a concern on your part that, gee, some people might want it to go to info discussion first before it going to action. What we're talking about here are only items that have been put into info discussion as opposed to action. And when we put that agenda out, we communicate both to board members and to the public. And if our officers in agenda planning feel it rightly belongs in action and should be brought to action, the transparent thing to do is to put it in action so everyone knows this will be an action item. So that is just want to elaborate both on the transparency and that we're not saying that people could never add an action item. It's just if something has been publicized as being info discussion, then you can't make that last minute switch. It should require unanimous consent to do that, in my opinion.
Scott?
I guess similar to the conversation about abstentions, I would regardless of which path we go on this, I would probably go towards Jim's commentary about including something in here that basically states that it's the board's expectation that substantive matters are not moved from information and discussion to action without due process, or just something like that, just to provide kind of that baseline expectation regardless of which path we might go. And I think if nothing else, that leaves the opening for the quote unquote less than substantive matters that we might move to action in a more routine manner to actually still be able to to have that occur. So I still like the two or more as one person.
Bob?
So if we can just come to a meeting and someone can make a motion and that motion is acted upon, up or down, it's still the majority of the board, right? That still can happen, correct? I'm just not sure why we can't follow the board majority on this item too. We're putting different options on the because that can still happen and there's not even a conversation prior to it. And, so I'm not sure the differences in the two scenarios, but obviously I think on this one, you should just take an action on what you want, whether it's majority or two people, or Laurel could make a motion for none, and just go with it. And I think we've talked about this a lot.
I think we had a conversation, and Scott Etter had been part of this conversation back in the fall about the question of whether if something was put on as information discussion, and even if our expectation or practice was that it required unanimous consent to move something, that there was still an end run around that can be done by not asking to move something from information discussion, but simply saying, I would like to make a motion that the administration does X, Y, Z, and then we have to vote on that motion. And so that sort of exists as an end run around this, no matter what wording we put here, I think. Is that right, Scott?
Yes, you captured it exactly as I recall it. And I wouldn't say that it wasn't intended as an end run, but at the time we were having that conversation, there were 2 or 3 items that had occurred right then at the most recent board or 2 board meetings prior to that. And that was the issue, that it seemed inconsistent that someone could come with the existing policy and on something that had not been on the agenda in any fashion, make a motion that night and get it onto the agenda with a simple majority, but something that had been on the agenda needed to meet a higher standard to move to an action item. So that was, I wasn't attending the policy committee meetings, or at least I don't recall that I was, but the way Amber phrased it was exactly my recollection 6 months ago or longer, whenever that was. I feel like it was around the start of school. So may have been the second board meeting in August is my guess.
And I guess the question was, if a board member wanted something to be approved that was not on the agenda as an action item, that they're still able to make a motion during a meeting in favor of something. So whether or not it was requested be moved to action from information discussion, it could just be a motion that was to approve a certain item.
Yeah, so I kind of feel like we're spinning our wheels here because you have the end run ability.
I'm not saying that we want to operate that way, or like I think as Jim had said, very articulately, that that's not the kind of practice that we want to do on a regular basis. So.
Oh, I agree. I just, and I think everybody will, for the most part, it's been very rare that we've moved items from info discussion to action that are, big decisions. It's been pretty unique. Obviously in the pandemic, it was even more unique, but that's not the norm that we're talking about here. So thanks.
David?
Thank you, Amber. So I'm inclined to support Jim's suggestion that would require 2 more people to move something from information to action. But I think Bob's point is really well taken. And what seems to be missing here is we probably need some part of policy to actually address that you cannot bring, for all the reasons that have been stated about transparency and allowing the public to know ahead of time what things we're going to be discussing, there should be we should put into policy a fairly high standard for just bringing something out of the blue and making an action item in a meeting. Are we not able to do that?
I don't know. I don't believe we can. I'd prefer Scott to weigh in on that, because I thought he had cited any board member has the ability to make a motion.
I agree. It's a policy consideration. I'm not aware of any statute, rule, or regulation that would be binding on us that would preclude a board member from doing that. It's the established practice of the board is how I would have characterized this, that has been codified to some extent in the policy of the district. But it's not one of those things that I would say to you that if you would violate it, you would choose to go in a different direction what the policy requires, I would say if you're going to do it every meeting, then you need to change the policy. But if you're choosing to do it on an irregular basis, but want to keep the policy as it is, I don't have a big issue with that. It's not one of your policies that you'd be violating a statute, rule, or regulation if you chose to go against it.
But if I could just continue the thought, I think there's value in putting into the policy what board norms are and saying this is not something that we accept to do. Now, I mean, legally, someone could do it, but at least you have a statement in policy saying this is not standard board practice to do this.
Right. I mean, if you have a policy that you're choosing not to follow, then significant consideration should be given to amending or getting rid of the policy. You want your policies to be followed unless you have a very good reason for not following it on any given occasion.
David, anything else?
Well, I mean, again, just to finish this point, it seems that we could work around, we could take the same thing to work around what we're trying to put into policy now and say, well, 2 or more members. What if someone says, well, then make something up to say we're going to put a new action item and just change the language slightly and do a complete runaround? I mean, so, you know, I think establishing policy makes sense.
All of this, and yeah, a lot of this working well together depends on people acting in good faith. So I don't know if a policy can.
Well, so but it's worth putting into language what we consider good faith to be. I mean, what that actually looks like. There's value in that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we well know in political circles that you can violate norms whenever you feel like it, but at least it's in policy.
Dan?
Yeah, I just want to, I mean, one of the things that has just made this a little more challenging for me is that it has, the 2 choices we have are based on an inversion of the vote, if you will. The first of the 2 choices we have suggests there should be a majority of whoever's present in favor of moving it to action. The second one says the inverse of that. It says you can have if two or more people object, then it doesn't go to action. And that's the way. And so they're like inverted ratios, if you will, for the vote required to accomplish this. So to look at them in the same valence, the same direction, the first one requires a majority of people present. The second requires a supermajority of people present. So if there are 9 people present, it could be as many as if 7 are in favor actually if 7 are, how's it go? If at least 7 or 8 are in favor of it going to action, then it can go. But my basic point is that when David was repeating it, David was suggesting that it just takes 2 people to find in the affirmative. And I think the way it's written, it's 2 people who are objecting that could keep it from going into action.
Mm-hmm.
That's all. I know it sounds like it's pretty simple idea, but to me, I'm trying to reconcile the language in the 2 choices.
I understand what you mean because they're kind of the phraseology is different on choice A and B.
It's inverted. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, I prefer
Amy?
the second because of the 2.
I think I had to be careful about what language we used about norms versus policy. I think that norms are created by the way the board functions, and as Scott mentioned, past practices where there's flexibility to make a choice. If you put something in policy, then it's policy and it's expected to be adhered to. And I don't support forbidding a board member from making a motion. I think there can be extraordinary subjects or instances that occur, like us being in a global pandemic, that might necessitate a board member to bring forth an idea. Another issue is, if one board member is, for some reason accused of some heinous act or something else, that a board member does need to be removed. Well, a board member would need to make a motion that that board member be removed. If you do not allow board members to bring forward motions that aren't on the agenda, that squashes the democratic process in my mind. And I just simply don't support that. I think it should be rare and unusual and not the standard practice. But if you put it in the policy, then that's codified. And I don't think that's safe or acceptable.
So I think we probably want to get a sense of, for the next draft of this policy, what the majority of the board would like to see in terms of, do we want option A or option B or something different? Would you like me to just go around the table, so to speak, to get people's input?
Or do raise hands?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'll just start. I guess I'll start. I am more comfortable with option B. And then I'll go alphabetically. Amy?
I am comfortable with either. B is fine with me.
Okay. Lori?
B is fine with me.
Gretchen?
Yeah, I don't have all this in front of me, so I am not comfortable responding right now.
Okay. Dan?
I feel closer to the second than the first.
Scott?
Yeah, the second, 2 or more.
Okay. And then Jim?
Yeah, I'm of the opinion of the 2 or more. I think it just needs to be a little bit less stringent than unanimous consent.
Okay. And Laurel?
There are 2 things. Given those 2 choices, I would say 2 or more. What I find interesting is that I finally found, when we previously discussed this on November 16th, and the reason I couldn't find it was that I was looking for a policy committee meeting that changed it. So when it came to the board on November 16th, the options were affirmative vote of majority or of all. When it came here, the 2 or more had been put in and the all had been removed. The question was asked, said that this is rare and why talk about it so much, but it's also very rare that even one person has objected when something's been moved to action or proposed to be moved to action. And I'll be very honest, it felt when this first came up, and I have managed to forget what the particular thing was, but it was very clear that I had said, I'm not comfortable moving it forward. And I was the only one saying that. And it was after that this even became a point of discussion. So I do take it personally. I'll be honest about that. I also think that even we've talked about people being able to make a motion, but that's a pretty extreme thing. When we have advertised to the public that we will be discussing something, it should require it should have a very high standard to deviate from that. And the high standard, in my opinion, should be everyone. It certainly should not just be the majority of the people present, because that could mean 3 people requiring 3 people to make that decision. And that's even more difficult. So.
Oh, I missed David.
Yeah, I'm in favor of the 2 or more language.
Okay. And I feel like this has been on, this policy and language around has been on agendas, like policy agendas, a number of times, and we haven't for some reason or another, it just kept getting sent back to policy committee for various reasons. And I think part of it was the PSBA review process is the reason why we had not actually addressed potential revisions to this, was because we punted it, because then when we approved having PSBA review all of our policies, then we delayed until PSBA had reviewed before we decided to re-examine this policy, is my memory of it. I'm not sure.
Right.
Gretchen?
Yeah, I just wanted to, Laurel had said that nobody had agreed with her, and that is not the case. I had agreed with her that one person should be able to prevent it from going to action. And
that wasn't what I meant. I'm
oh,
sorry.
okay, because she had
No.
said, yeah, Laurel, you had said nobody, I was the only one. And I just wanted to say you were not the only one.
That particular time was one.
Okay,
Not-
'cause the whole time since this has been on different policy committee agendas and full board agendas, the entire time I have made calls to other board members about this, that I believe in protecting the rights of the minority. I think it is good democratic process. And so I'm basically trying to say I agree with Laurel. And that, you know, as Bob had said, is it time to just move on to what the majority wants? You know, maybe it is, but I just wanted to put, you know, for the record that I do have a problem with this. Thanks.
Okay. All right. So next steps with this. Sorry, Laurel?
We had moved back from abstention, and I wanted to add, I thought that the way Scott worded the wording regarding abstention, that in terms of it would be the expectation, I was much more comfortable with than sort of saying, well, we'll have a policy that we can't enforce that prohibits a board member. So I thought that was, in terms of abstaining, I thought that was a good suggestion.
Oh, and we still have to go through the rest of the policy. Sorry.
Where are we with moving an item from info discussion? Are we thinking, or are we including B? And what do we think about the suggestion of including a sentence that says the board's expectation is that substantive matters are not moved from info to action?
I would be comfortable with including that.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Should we move on from this? Okay.
In the abstention section, I thought I said, I'm sorry. I did include Scott's suggestion about the board in general expects that abstentions will not occur except for the reasons listed above.
Hey, Linda, I just would like to interject before we go on for another lengthy period of time. Wouldn't we want the policy committee to make a recommendation on a policy? Or do we want to write this at the full table? That's my question of the board, because we have a committee doing our work on this. And I think we wanted to touch on the most sensitive item, and we did. Do we want, we can continue here. I'm just asking the question.
I had one thing that was deleted from that I wanted to propose bringing to not delete further along in the policy. But.
I mean, can't we give feedback to the committee and let them come back with, or is it the job of the full board to do the committee's work on writing a draft?
Well, I think that we're where we are because the last time we came to the board with the draft, we were asking for feedback about, in particular, the question that we just deliberated over. And we came, and the agreement was after that conversation that we would bring back more solidified language on those two particular items. And so coming into this meeting, my thought was the board agrees in spirit to choose one of those because we brought both of them as possibilities. I think the committee itself was slightly conflicted about this. So my thought was we either decide it here like this, or we bring it back, two versions of the policy, and we vote one, or we vote, we
Right.
vote on them each. So that's kind of where we are with this, because yeah, it's been before the board a couple of times. Yeah.
Gretchen?
Yeah, I wanted to just reiterate what Lori said, in that because this has gone back and forth, so many times between committee and full board, it's probably time to put something on the agenda for the board to vote on, and then the board members can either vote yes or no.
Yeah, I think it made sense to poll, especially on that moving to action because of the sensitivity over the years.
Linda, so we got through the section on abstention,
Mm-hmm.
and then the next part is minutes.
And again, most of these changes are from PSBA. Recess, convene, the same thing. Executive session, the same thing. Work sessions. PSBA suggested some changes to committee meetings. And then the last section, PSBA suggested deleting the conferences section.
That was my question about why we would delete that.
We don't have to. It again, this reflects PSBA's suggestion.
I guess I was going to suggest keeping it because it seems like otherwise the exec session language is potentially so restrictive that board members might not realize that board conferences are an option under school code.
Yeah, I think that's a smart observation.
I think it's just an institutional memory kind of thing.
I don't have a problem with keeping the whole conference section. I think it's completely fine and appropriate.
And if it continues to be, if it's still consistent with school code. Any feedback?
So anybody object to us keeping that language? Okay.
It's fine. I think it makes sense to keep it, especially given the direction we've been given for continuing education, professional development for board members. I think we need to have those experiences. And right now we're in a position where PSBA is creating the curriculum, but we may decide, we may be provided in the future the opportunity to create our own curriculum for professional development. And that language may come in handy.
And now directors are also required to go to required trainings as well, but.
Right, that's true.
Okay.
So do I understand correctly that the board is asking the committee to put a proposed revised policy forward for action?
That's my understanding.
We shall do so.
Okay. All right. So that brings us to the end of info discussion.
You can thank Bob's for his patience, by the way.
So moving on to committee reports, and I would just suggest we keep the rest of these really brief because tomorrow morning's a snowy, icy morning and administrators are getting up early in the morning to determine the weather for school decisions. So we should try and move quickly through the rest of the agenda. Committee reports, we had a facilities and grounds meeting on the 3rd. Gretchen?
Yeah, some of those items we voted on tonight, actually, and the others I would just refer people to the minutes. Thanks.
Scott, Finance Committee?
Ditto to what Gretchen just said regarding finance.
So upcoming meetings, we have policy development on the 17th and culture, climate, and learning on the 24th. And then looking out at board reports. Dan, is there an intermediate unit report?
Yeah, the last intermediate unit board meeting had 3 major elements. We had a review of our audit report from Baker Tilly, and we had 2 separate presentations on facilities projects, one by Crabtree Roba and one by a group called Site Logic, that were shared with the board, and the facilities committee for the IU board was then charged with further review of those 2 facilities design proposals.
Okay, finance, oh, I'm sorry. National School Board Association, PSBA, David?
I don't have anything to add to what I said earlier.
Okay. Scott, the Ed Foundation?
Yeah, just very, very briefly, I was not able to attend the last meeting, but Randy brought me up to speed that they discussed current year financial update through December of 2020, discussed the audit and the 990, which is the tax filing for fiscal year 1920. There were presentation of the EITC funds that were awarded to STEM, discussion of a possible stock donation, and then just so everybody's aware, the Maroon and Gray event for 2021 will be virtual. Thanks.
Okay, are there any CAC reports? I did go to the athletics CAC, and it was, primarily a discussion around, the success of the current seasons. So,
Nothing from facilities.
Okay. Any other CAC reports? Okay. Then at this time on the agenda, we have time for public comment. Each individual is limited to comments of 2 minutes as time permits for items either on a board agenda or that are related to board business. Is anyone here who would like to make a public comment? Okay, so if you could, when you begin your comment, just state your name and where you reside in the district, and then we'll keep track of the time for you. Okay, Mr. Williamson, I see your hand raised.
Good evening. My name is Steve Williamson, College Township. And sorry here, exit full screen. So the main reason, or main thing I wanted to talk about was I've been asking this question over the past few months, and it's about the criteria to return grades 6 to 12 to school on a daily basis. I never received a response about any kind of plan that this district has. And I feel like this is something that should have been at the forefront of the discussion since October. We've spent countless hours talking about pathways for sports during board meeting time, but never anything about, what are we doing to get kids 6 to 12 back to school? Now, Dr. O'Donnell has said some things about this 6 feet requirement. And I guess maybe I'm not reading things correctly or not, but there is no 6 feet requirement. There is a 6 foot guideline. And even the most recent CDC thing says 6 feet to the greatest extent possible. So I guess there's some miscommunication there on who's the cause of the 6 foot requirement. And in my opinion, it's the district. The district has put this in place and the district can change this. To say that this district is making the best of a bad situation, to me, would be a false narrative. There's been 105 days of school, and my sixth grader has seen the inside of a building in just 35 days. I find that to be very sad. And what's even sadder is that there's no plan to change this. The health and safety plan is long overdue a revision that allows for daily education for 6th to 12th grade. In almost every place, about 6 feet, greatest extent possible. Other districts are doing this successfully without a 6-foot mandate. You've cherry-picked language just like you've cherry-picked studies in the past. Almost all of the data that the health and safety team pores over has been shown to be irrelevant in relation to schools. There is no school-to-home pipeline. There's no school-to-hospital pipeline for this virus. 3 to 5 feet apart in a school setting with masks has not added to community spread. As a teacher, I can easily maintain more than 6 feet between myself and any individual if that is what I choose to do. Please stop coming up with reasons not to do things and allow the kids back in school every day. You have purposefully kept the students out of the classroom, and I don't see how you can think
Mr. Williamson, I
there's a
believe your
commitment to
time.
education.
Yeah.
We've explained why we have 6 feet in place.
All right, thank you. Anyone else here to make a public comment? Okay. All right, so moving on then to future agenda planning. The next regular meeting of the board is March 1st. And with that, I'd like a motion to adjourn to executive session.
Leah, so moved.
Amber, I'd like to request rescheduling the exec session since it's 10:20 p.m.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right, so Jim, do you want to revise that? To
Yeah, motion to adjourn.
Duffy, second.
Second. Bader.
So that has been moved and seconded. All in favor of adjourning? Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay, we are adjourned. Okay. Have a good evening, everyone.
Good night.